It began with the sky, quiet, pale, almost motionless, the kind of sky that seems too gentle to have anything to do with war. But beneath that stillness lay tension, sharp and electric, felt by the men who trained their bodies to fall from that sky with a calmness that defied instinct. The German Fallschirmjäger were born from an idea that seemed impossible. Soldiers who would descend from the heavens themselves, landing behind enemy lines, striking before the world below understood what had arrived. On the training fields, long before they ever faced the Allied armies in the West, these men learned to trust their lives to canvas, rope, and wind. They felt the rush of air against their faces as they leapt from towers, the jolt of harness straps digging into shoulders, the ground rising in a blur that demanded precision with every landing. The training was brutal. Fallschirmjäger were shaped not into perfect warriors, but into men who could remain composed inside uncertainty, men who could step into emptiness and believe they would survive whatever waited below. But the Western Front was not a training ground, it was a world torn apart. When the Fallschirmjäger first arrived in France, they did not arrive as conquerors, they arrived as specialists deployed to reinforce collapsing lines, to defend crossroads and towns, to hold bridges and ridges that mattered more than their size suggested. The air war had changed, parachute drops became rarer. Now they fought mostly as infantry elite, but exhausted, disciplined but human. Their reputation travelled ahead of them. Allied soldiers spoke of them in hushed tones, not out of admiration, but out of recognition that these were troops who held ground with grim determination. But reputation meant nothing against artillery, against tanks, against skies thick with Allied aircraft. The Fallschirmjäger faced a front where every hour grew more desperate, where every defensive line was a delaying action, where every order demanded sacrifice. In Normandy, they dug into hedgerows, already soaked with smoke from days of fighting. The fields were beautiful before the war touched them, soft grasses waving in the breeze, apple orchards humming with insects, small stone farmhouses tucked behind narrow lanes. But after the landings, those same fields became killing zones. Mortar shells churned soil into black scars, machine gun fire stitched across greenery, trees collapsed under direct hits. The Fallschirmjäger did not yield easily, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and slowly pushed back inch by inch. Their commanders demanded impossible things. Hold this ridge beyond endurance. Delay this division for another day. Buy time for a counterattack that never arrived. Stand firm when retreat would have meant survival. War does not negotiate with fatigue. As the Allies broke through Normandy and poured across France, the Fallschirmjäger found themselves fighting in towns that folded under bombardment like paper. They defended river crossings at dawn, slipping through fog that clung to the water as if trying to hide them. They fought in forests where every crack of a twig sent nerves trembling. They retreated through fields littered with broken equipment and memories that stuck to their boots like mud. And then came Holland market garden, where rivers became walls, and every village became a fortress under siege. Fallschirmjäger units held bridges against overwhelming odds, their machine guns echoing across the calm Dutch canals. Civilians hid in basements, hearing battles raging above them with a violence that felt too large for their peaceful streets. The Fallschirmjäger fought fiercely, but each hour dragged them further into exhaustion, into scarcity, into a realization that the war had tilted beyond anyone's control. Winter brought the Ardennes snow settling thickly across pine branches, breath freezing in the air, footsteps crunching softly across white ground. The Fallschirmjäger were thrown into the offensive with minimal supplies and enormous expectations. They marched through forests where silence felt heavy enough to break. They fought in towns where the only warmth came from burning rubble. They held positions that collapsed beneath artillery that shook the earth itself. By the time the war pushed deeper into Germany, many Fallschirmjäger units were Fallschirmjäger in name only, depleted, battered, stitched together from whatever remnants could still stand. They defended collapsing lines not for glory, not for ideology, but because the alternative was surrender or annihilation. They fought in ruined cities where fire lit the night sky, in suburbs turned to rubble, in streets filled with civilians fleeing in every direction. Tonight, we return to their story, not to glorify, not to romanticize, but to understand, to the moment when young men stepped from aircraft into the unknown, to the hedgerows of Normandy where visibility narrowed to the width of a rifle barrel, to the Dutch streets where canals reflected burning rooftops, to the Ardennes forests where the wind carried the weight of fear, to the final battles where exhaustion replaced hope, This is not the story of superhuman warriors. It is the story of human beings shaped by training, driven by orders, tested by chaos, crushed by a war that consumed everything in its path. Before we move deeper, I want to ask you something soft, something personal, something only you can answer. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what hour rests quietly around you? Is it late, still, wrapped in dim light, or is it early, with the world around you just beginning to settle? And something deeper crafted only for this episode. The Fallschirmjäger story reminds us how often people are thrown into situations larger than themselves, forced to navigate choices shaped by circumstances they never created. In your life, has there been a moment where you felt caught in something bigger than what you wanted, yet you kept going anyway? If you feel comfortable, share what that experience taught you. And if these long, slow journeys into the past help your breathing soften, your thoughts settle, or your eyes grow heavy, consider subscribing. April 1935. A dusty airfield outside Rome. Hermann Goering stands with his arms crossed, watching Italian paratroopers tumble from transport planes like seeds scattered by the wind. The Reichsmarshal's eyes narrow with calculation. What he sees isn't military innovation, it's opportunity. While the Wehrmacht expands Germany's army and the Kriegsmarine rebuilds the fleet, Goering's Luftwaffe risks becoming merely a supporting arm, glorified taxi drivers for real soldiers. But here, falling through Italian skies, is the solution. Soldiers who belong to the Air Force, warriors whose very existence expands his empire. Within weeks, he'll return to Berlin with plans for Germany's own paratroopers. Within months, those plans will birth a force that rewrites the rules of warfare and ultimately consumes itself in the fires of its own mythology. The birth of the Fallschirmjäger was never about military necessity. It was about bureaucratic empire building wrapped in revolutionary rhetoric. When Goering presented his proposal to Hitler in May 1935, he didn't emphasize tactical advantages or strategic possibilities. He emphasized spectacle, modernity, and the chance to humiliate hidebound army generals who thought warfare peaked at Verdun. Hitler, always enchanted by the new and dramatic, approved immediately. By October 1935, the first experimental parachute unit assembled at Stendal Airfield, a ragtag collection of Luftwaffe volunteers who'd never fired a rifle in combat. Their commander, Major Bruno Breuer, was a World War I veteran who understood infantry tactics but had never jumped from an aeroplane. The blind would lead the blind, and both would learn by breaking bones. The German military, rebuilt in defiance of Versailles, now added another violation to its list: an airborne force that existed nowhere in traditional military doctrine, controlled by an air force that had no business commanding ground troops. The early jumps were disasters dressed up as training exercises. The RZ-1 parachute, adapted from Italian designs, featured a single-point harness that snapped men's bodies like whips when the canopy deployed. Broken collarbones became so common that medical officers stopped recording them as unusual injuries. Worse still, the parachute had no reserve. If the main chute failed, you died. Simple as that. Jump training at Stendal and later at Wittstock became a grotesque lottery where 3 to 5% of trainees suffered serious injury during peacetime operations. British and American paratroopers, when they eventually appeared, would consider a 0.5% training injury rate excessive. The Germans accepted 10 times that figure as the cost of being first. Then there was the doctrinal insanity. Fallschirmjäger jumped without personal weapons, carrying only a knife and grenades. Their rifles, machine guns, and ammunition fell separately in heavy containers that often landed hundreds of meters away. For 2 to 5 minutes after hitting the ground, these supposedly elite troops were essentially unarmed, scrambling through enemy territory, hoping to find their equipment before the enemy found them. It was madness, but it was Goering's madness, and no army general could stop it. By September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, approximately 4,000 trained Fallschirmjäger existed. They were organized into the 1st Fallschirmjäger Regiment under Major Richard Heydrich, consisting of 3 battalions, plus the 7th Flieger Division, a larger formation that mixed parachute and glider-trained troops. These men were volunteers, physically fit, intensely motivated, and completely inexperienced in ground combat. They'd learned to fall from the sky, but not to fight once they landed. The Luftwaffe had created paratroopers by teaching pilots and mechanics to jump, rather than teaching infantrymen to fly. It showed when the Fallschirmjäger finally deployed to Poland in late September, they travelled by truck and train, used as ordinary infantry to mop up remaining Polish resistance. Their parachutes stayed in storage. Goering's revolutionary force had missed the Revolutionary War it was designed to fight. Hitler barely noticed the Blitzkrieg had succeeded without them, proving that tanks and aircraft were the real revolution. The paratroopers seemed like an expensive curiosity, 4,000 men consuming resources better spent on proven systems. October 1939. The Führer inspects the 1st Fallschirmjäger Regiment at their Stendal base. The men stand rigid in their distinctive jump smocks, baggy trousers tucked into high boots, steel helmets painted Luftwaffe blue. Hitler walks the ranks slowly, studying faces. These troops look different from Wehrmacht infantry, younger, leaner, more intense. Goering explains the training regimen, the rigorous selection process, the revolutionary potential of vertical envelopment. Hitler listens with the expression of a man being sold a racehorse of uncertain bloodlines. When he speaks, his questions are pointed. How quickly can they deploy? What happens if they land in the wrong place? Can they hold ground without artillery support? Goering deflects, promises, assures. Student, standing nearby, remains silent. He knows the answers to Hitler's questions, and none of them are reassuring. The Wehrmacht's parachute force is an experiment searching for a war. Within months, it will find one in Norway, where snow and bullets will reveal every flaw Goering's ambition has papered over. The structural flaw at the heart of the Fallschirmjäger was administrative, not tactical. By placing paratroopers under Luftwaffe rather than Army command, Germany created a hybrid force that fit nowhere in military doctrine. Army commanders couldn't direct them because they weren't army troops. Luftwaffe commanders didn't understand infantry tactics because they were pilots and aircraft engineers. The Fallschirmjäger existed in organizational limbo, elite troops with no clear place in the command structure. This mattered more than anyone realized in 1939. Modern combined arms warfare requires seamless coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and air support. The Germans had perfected this coordination in Poland, but only within the army. The Fallschirmjäger, reporting through Luftwaffe channels, operated outside that system. When they eventually jumped into combat, they'd do so without the supporting arms that made German blitzkrieg devastating. They'd be elite infantry without artillery, shock troops without armor, aggressive attackers without the defensive depth that allowed Wehrmacht units to absorb counterattacks. Goering had created specialists without a system to support them. Student understood this. So did the handful of World War I veterans in Fallschirmjäger ranks who'd seen what happened to unsupported infantry. But in the euphoria of Poland's collapse, nobody listened to warnings. Germany was winning. The Fallschirmjäger would prove themselves in battle, or they wouldn't. Either way, the war would be over by Christmas. Winter 1939 through 1940. Training intensifies at Wittstock and Braunschweig. The Fallschirmjäger practice exits from Junkers 52 transports, refine landing techniques, conduct tactical exercises on the ground. Officers study Crete, not the battle that will destroy them, but the ancient battles, particularly Thermopylae, where small forces held against numerically superior enemies. The parallels seem obvious. Paratroopers, like Spartans, will be elite warriors dropped into impossible positions, expected to hold until relieved. The parallel is more accurate than anyone realizes, except nobody considers how Thermopylae ended. Meanwhile, changes come slowly. Reports from Poland recommend personal weapons for paratroopers, but redesigning the RZ-16 parachute to accommodate rifle weight takes months. Requests for winter equipment languish in Luftwaffe supply depots. After all, they're airborne troops. They'll operate in temperate seasons. The assumption that Germany controls the timing of battles will prove fatal in Norway. By March 1940, the 1st Fallschirmjäger Regiment has expanded slightly, absorbed more volunteers, improved proficiency. They're ready for their first mission. Nobody knows it will be a disaster that the history books will barely mention. The mythology of the Fallschirmjäger began before they fired their first shot. German newsreels showed young men leaping from aircraft, parachutes blossoming against blue skies, troops landing in perfect formations. The propaganda emphasized modernity, courage, precision, warriors of the new Germany conquering vertical space. Foreign military attachés watched these films with mix of envy and skepticism. The British military establishment dismissed parachute troops as circus performers, unsuited to serious warfare. Soviet observers took careful notes. They'd experimented with paratroopers since the early 1930s and understood the potential. American military planners filed reports recommending further study, but the United States Army had exactly 0 paratroopers in 1940 and no immediate plans to recruit any. The Germans appeared to have created something genuinely new, an entirely fresh category of soldier. Whether that innovation would prove valuable or merely novel remained to be seen. Göring certainly believed in the potential. He expanded the parachute training program, requested more transport aircraft, lobbied Hitler for greater resources. Student, more cautious, focused on improving equipment and doctrine. The tension between Göring's ambition and students' professionalism would define Fallschirmjäger history, great soldiers hampered by terrible leadership. April 1940 arrives, with reports of Allied mining operations in Norwegian waters. Hitler, furious at this violation of neutral territory, as if Germany respects neutrality orders, immediate invasion. Operation Weserübung will seize Norway and Denmark simultaneously, securing iron ore routes from Sweden and denying Britain naval bases. The plan requires speed, surprise, and forces that can strike deep into Norwegian territory ahead of the main invasion. For the first time, the Fallschirmjäger will jump into combat. Student receives orders to prepare detachments for airfield seizures at Oslo Fornebu, Stavanger Sola, and Kristiansand Kivik. Additionally, one company will drop at Dombo's railway junction to cut the main north-south rail line and prevent Allied reinforcements. The missions are straightforward on paper: capture airports, hold until relieved by seaborne forces. In practice, everything that can go wrong with parachute operations will go wrong. The Fallschirmjäger are about to learn the difference between training jumps over friendly German fields and combat drops into enemy territory. The snow of Norway will run red with lessons that Göring's headquarters will systematically ignore, and in that blood, the seeds of Crete are already planted. 60 years later, historians studying the Fallschirmjäger face a peculiar challenge. The sources lie. Not intentionally, but structurally. German after-action reports from 1941 onward are propaganda documents as much as military analysis, designed to maintain Luftwaffe prestige and justify resource allocation. Students' personal papers, preserved in German military archives, reveal a commander who understood his troops' limitations but couldn't overcome institutional momentum. Göring's role is documented through speeches and directives that showcase a leader more concerned with political empire than military effectiveness. The truth about the Fallschirmjäger, their genuine courage, their systematic misuse, their ultimate irrelevance to the war's outcome, emerges only through cross-referencing German records with Allied intelligence reports, casualty statistics, and post-war interviews with survivors. What emerges is a tragedy of wasted potential. Extraordinary soldiers, constrained by organizational stupidity, fighting brilliantly for a cause that deserved nothing from them, dying in numbers that should have ended the program but instead fed the myth of invincibility. The Fallschirmjäger weren't super soldiers. They were ordinary men placed in extraordinary circumstances by commanders who understood spectacle better than strategy. Their story begins in the snow of Norway and it ends in the mud of Germany. Everything in between is a long, bloody lesson in the limits of elite forces when strategy fails. April 9th, 1940, 1:30 in the afternoon. Lieutenant Herbert Schmidt watches the Norwegian coast approach through the open door of a Junkers 52 transport. Behind him, 42 men from First Company sit in 2 rows, hands gripping static lines, faces pale beneath their helmets. The aircraft lurches through turbulence, or is it anti-aircraft fire? Schmidt can't tell. Oslo Fornebu Airport should be secured by now, seized in the morning assault by transport aircraft carrying infantry who simply landed and stormed the facilities. But something went wrong. Radio reports are confused. Now First Company is jumping blind into a situation nobody fully understands, following a plan already compromised. Schmidt checks his watch. 30 seconds, he looks back at his men and sees what they're all feeling. This isn't like training. Training doesn't shoot back. The jumpmaster's hand rises. 20 seconds. The Junker's engines roar louder. Schmidt positions himself at the door, grabs the frame, feels the icy wind tear at his jump smock. 10 seconds. 5. The hand drops. Schmidt throws himself into Norwegian sky. The First Company's drop at Oslo Fornebu was chaos. Transport aircraft, scattered by Norwegian anti-aircraft fire, approached from different directions at different altitudes. Men jumped across a 3-kilometre dispersal area. some landing on the runway, others in nearby forests, a few in the ice-cold waters of Oslo Fjord. Schmidt hit the ground hard, rolled, fought with his harness as rifle fire cracked from Norwegian positions. 30 seconds, that's how long it took him to shed his parachute and look for his weapon container. It had landed 100 meters away, across open ground covered by Norwegian machine guns. This was the fundamental design flaw of Fallschirmjäger doctrine manifesting under fire. Soldiers dropping without weapons, vulnerable, scrambling for equipment while enemy troops recovered from surprise and began systematic engagement. Of the 43 men in First Company, 12 were killed or wounded in the first 5 minutes before they could arm themselves. The survivors fought their way to the weapon containers, assembled into improvised teams, and began clearing Norwegian positions. By nightfall, Oslo Fornebu was secured, but only because Norwegian forces were too disorganized to mount a coordinated defense. The Germans had won, but barely, and only against an enemy as confused as they were. April 14th, 1940, Dombås Railway Junction, Central Norway. Second Company's mission is simple on paper: drop, seize the junction, prevent Norwegian forces from moving south along the rail line to reinforce Oslo. Simple, until you factor in terrain. Dombås sits in a valley surrounded by forested hills, with temperatures hovering around -8°C. When Second Company exits their transports at 300 meters altitude, they scatter across 4 kilometers of snow-covered landscape. Half the weapon containers land in dense forest, invisible beneath pine canopies. Men hit the ground in standard jump uniforms, no winter gear, no white camouflage, just field grey against brilliant snow. Within an hour of landing, Norwegian ski troops have located the dispersed paratroopers. The Norwegians move across snow faster than Germans can march on foot. They strike from tree lines, pin down scattered groups, methodically hunt for more. Second Company Commander Hauptmann Gerhard Schirmer manages to consolidate 85 men around the village centre, but 100 others remain lost in the forests. Those who survive the first day spend the night in commandeered houses, burning furniture for warmth, rationing the ammunition they've managed to recover. April 15th through 19th, 1940, 5 days. The Dombås paratroopers hold the village against increasing Norwegian pressure. But hold is a generous term for their situation. They occupy a shrinking perimeter, taking casualties daily from Norwegian snipers and probing attacks. Ammunition dwindles. The Luftwaffe attempts supply drops, but in mountainous terrain with uncertain navigation, most supplies fall outside German lines. By April 17th, Second Company is down to 20 rounds per man. They strip dead Norwegians of weapons and ammunition, Krag-Jørgensen rifles that require different ammunition from German Mausers, making the supply situation even worse. The men begin to understand something the training never taught. Parachute operations have a critical time window. If you're not relieved within 48 hours, you die slowly of attrition. Fornebu succeeded because relief arrived in 6 hours. Dombås is failing because relief doesn't come. On April 18th, a patrol probes south and encounters lead elements of a German relief column still 15 kilometers away, fighting through Norwegian resistance. Schirmer's radio operator manages to establish contact. The colonel commanding the relief force is blunt. They're advancing as quickly as possible, but if Second Company can't hold another 24 hours, withdraw into the forest. For paratroopers, the idea of withdrawing before completing the mission is psychologically devastating. They hold. April 19th, 1940, morning. The relief column breaks through Norwegian lines and enters Dombås. What they find shocks even veteran Wehrmacht officers. Second Company survivors have been in continuous light contact for 5 days, sleeping in shifts, eating whatever they could scavenge from Norwegian homes and farms. Of 185 paratroopers dropped, 46 are dead, 73 wounded, a 42% casualty rate. The walking wounded are manning positions, men with bullet wounds through limbs still standing watch because there's nobody else. The Norwegian forces melting back into the hills didn't break through, but they didn't need to. Time and temperature were doing the work for them. The relief column's medical officers work frantically to stabilize the wounded for evacuation. Schmidt, wounded twice but still commanding his platoon, refuses evacuation until his men are loaded onto trucks. When they finally pull out, Second Company effectively ceases to exist as a combat unit. Back at regimental headquarters, student reads the after-action reports with growing alarm. Everything that could go wrong did. Scattered drops, lost equipment, no winter gear, inadequate supplies, extended isolation. He compiles 16 pages of recommendations: personal weapons for paratroopers, improved container design, winter equipment protocols, better drop zone reconnaissance, stricter relief column coordination. The report goes to Goering's staff. It vanishes into bureaucratic channels. Nothing changes. The Norway campaign continued through April and May, with additional Fallschirmjäger drops at Stavanger Sola and Kristiansand achieving mixed results. Total deployment reached approximately 1,500 paratroopers across multiple operations. Casualty rates varied. Some drops succeeded with minimal losses, others approached Donbass's horrific numbers. The pattern that emerged would define every subsequent Fallschirmjäger operation. When surprise was complete and relief immediate, they succeeded brilliantly. When either factor failed, they bled. German newsreels showed triumphant paratroopers accepting Norwegian surrender, Fallschirmjäger standing victorious at captured airfields, the symbols of modern warfare. What newsreels didn't show? The body bags, the frostbite casualties, the men who landed in forests and died alone searching for equipment. Goering declared Norway a victory for airborne warfare, proof of the Fallschirmjäger's revolutionary potential. Student reading casualty reports saw a different lesson. Airborne operations were incredibly risky, highly dependent on factors outside commander's control, and sustainable only if limited to short-duration missions with guaranteed relief. The gap between Goering's propaganda and students' analysis would never close. Germany's parachute force would continue operating under the assumptions of the former while living with the consequences of the latter. May 1940, Wehrmacht Headquarters, Berlin. Student presents Norway after-action analysis to a mixed audience of Army and Luftwaffe officers. The Army representatives are skeptical. They've heard parachute enthusiasts make grand claims before. Student surprises them by emphasizing limitations rather than successes. He explains the Donbass situation in clinical detail, how dispersion multiplies vulnerability, how difficult it is to locate drop supplies under combat conditions, how paratroopers without artillery or armor can be pinned down by numerically inferior but better positioned forces. An army general interrupts. If conditions must be so perfect, what's the point? Students' response is measured. Airborne forces are surgical instruments, not hammers. Use them to seize key objectives that unlock conventional advances, airfields, bridges, passes, then immediately reinforce with regular troops. Never expect paratroopers to hold indefinitely against sustained opposition. The army officers nod. They understand this logic. It's how they'd use any specialized force. But a Luftwaffe colonel objects. Student is underselling the potential. With better training, improved equipment, larger drops, Fallschirmjäger could conduct independent operations, seize entire regions, force enemy collapse. Goering agrees. The meeting ends with students' concerns noted and largely ignored. The Fallschirmjäger will get more resources, expanded training, increased status, everything except the realistic doctrine that might keep them alive. Norwegian veterans of the Donbass battle later described the German paratroopers as brave but tactically naive. One Norwegian officer recalled watching Germans bunched together after landing, making easy targets as if they'd never been taught basic infantry dispersal. Another noted how Germans called out to each other in German while searching for equipment, essentially announcing their positions. These were soldiers trained to jump, not to fight after landing, and it showed the German army's infantry training was excellent, emphasizing small unit tactics, camouflage, fire and movement, but Fallschirmjäger training focused on parachute operations, with ground combat skills assumed, rather than systematically taught. This would improve over time. Survivors of Norway would train new recruits differently, incorporating hard lessons. But in April 1940, the Fallschirmjäger were learning infantry tactics under fire, paying tuition in blood. The Norwegian campaign should have been a wake-up call, proof that airborne operations required extensive rethinking. Instead, it became a footnote, overshadowed by the dramatic success about to unfold in Belgium and Holland. History would remember Fort Eben Emael. It would forget Donbass. That forgetting would cost thousands of lives in Crete. The weapons issue exemplified the gap between doctrine and reality. German military doctrine emphasized heavy firepower. Every infantry squad included an MG-34 machine gun, making Wehrmacht units exceptionally lethal in firefights. But Fallschirmjäger jumped without that machine gun. It fell separately. The squad had to land, locate the container, assuming it wasn't lost or damaged, open it, assemble the weapon, then commence operations. In Norway's chaotic conditions, squads often fought for hours with only rifles and grenades before recovering their machine guns. Some never did. Second Company at Dombos lost 3 MG-34s in drop-related mishaps, weapon containers, fell through ice on a frozen lake, landed in tree branches 30 feet up, or simply disappeared into Norway's vast forests. Students' after-action recommendations included developing a parachute-portable machine gun, something paratroopers could jump with rather than waiting to recover from containers. The recommendation went nowhere. The MG-34 was a magnificent weapon, but heavy and complex. Designing a lighter version would take years and significant resources. Meanwhile, paratroopers would continue jumping unarmed, praying they landed near their weapons before the enemy found them. Spring 1940. Training facilities at Braunschweig and Wittstock expand to accommodate new volunteer recruits. The Norway campaign, despite its casualties, attracted volunteers. Young Luftwaffe personnel saw parachuting as exciting, elite, a path to glory unavailable in conventional roles. The selection process remained rigorous, excellent physical condition, high motivation, psychological stability under stress. Training was brutal. Recruits learned to exit aircraft correctly, control their descent, execute proper landing roles. The training regimen emphasized repetition. Candidates made dozens of practice jumps before qualifying. Injuries remained common, but acceptable losses in pursuit of building an elite force. What training didn't adequately address was combat after landing. Recruits learned to shoot rifles and throw grenades, but not infantry tactics. They learnt to run and jump, but not to dig in and defend. They learnt individual skills, but not unit cohesion under fire. This reflected a fundamental confusion about what Fallschirmjäger were. Were they infantrymen who arrived by parachute, or were they paratroopers who sometimes had to fight? The distinction seems academic, but it mattered enormously. Infantry training emphasized prolonged combat, sustainability, defensive operations. Parachute training emphasized shock, speed, seizing objectives, and holding briefly until relieved. The Fallschirmjäger were trained for the latter, but would increasingly be required to perform the former. Norway hinted at this problem, the Low Countries would magnify it, and Crete would make it catastrophically obvious. May 10th, 1940, 4:30 in the morning. Obergefreiter Karl Meyer sits in a DFS 230 glider, one of 78 men squeezed into 9 gliders, waiting for the Junkers 52 tow aircraft to lift them into darkness. Fort Eben-Emael, the objective, sits 15 kilometers away across the Belgian border, the most powerful fortress in Europe, allegedly impregnable. Its armoured cupolas house 75mm guns covering approaches to 3 critical bridges over the Albert Canal. British and French war planners consider Eben-Emael the anchor of Belgian defences, a modern fortress that will channel German forces into killing zones and buy time for Allied mobilisation. German intelligence agrees. Conventional assault would be suicidal. The fortress was designed by brilliant military engineers specifically to resist exactly that, which is why Meyer and 77 other men from Sturmabteilung Koch are going to land on the fortress roof in the dark. Silence achieved through glider approach, an attack from above using experimental hollow charge explosives the Belgians don't know exist. The plan is insane. Insanity at 4:30 on May 10th, 1940 is about to become operational doctrine. The tow cable snaps taut. Meyer's stomach lurches as the glider lifts into Belgian sky. 4:35 in the morning. The gliders release from their tow aircraft and descend in eerie silence toward Eben-Emael. Belgian sentries hear nothing until the glider's landing skids screech across the fortress roof. By then it's too late. Troops from Sturmabteilung Koch pour from the gliders, move immediately to their assigned objectives. They've studied scale models of the fortress for weeks. They know exactly where every cupola, every gun position, every entrance sits. 50-kilogram hollow charge explosives are placed against armoured cupolas. The shape charges, a revolutionary technology that focuses explosive force into a superheated jet capable of penetrating armour, detonate with shattering roars. Armoured cupolas designed to resist sustained artillery bombardment breach in seconds. Belgian crews, shocked into paralysis by the impossible enemy troops appearing on the roof, abandon positions or die inside them. The fortress garrison numbers 1,200 men, the assault force totals 78, but the 1,200 are distributed throughout the fortress complex, unable to coordinate. while the 78 are concentrated at critical points, moving with practiced precision. Within 10 minutes of landing, Sturmabteilung Koch controls the fortress roof. Within an hour, they've destroyed or neutralized every major gun position. By mid-morning, Fort Eben Emael, the mighty shield of Belgium, is effectively neutralized by a force smaller than a single company. May 10th through 11th, 1940, while Eben Emael makes headlines, the larger Fallschirmjäger operation unfolds across Holland. 3 parachute battalions drop around The Hague with an audacious goal: capture the Dutch government, Queen Wilhelmina, the entire apparatus of state, and force immediate surrender. The plan reflects Hitler's infatuation with dramatic coups and Göring's conviction that airborne forces can achieve the impossible. Reality delivers a harsh education. The drops scatter across multiple airfields near The Hague, Ockenburg, Valkenburg, Yppenburg. Dutch forces, already on alert from reports of German invasion, meet the paratroopers with sustained fire. Unlike Norwegian defenders, the Dutch have clear fields of fire around their airfields. Unlike at Eben Emael, there's no surprise Dutch troops watch German transport aircraft approach and open fire before paratroopers even jump. Men are shot in the air, dangling from parachutes, unable to evade or return fire. The Hague drops turn into slaughter. Of roughly 1,000 paratroopers committed to capturing the government, over 300 are killed or wounded in the first hours. The survivors consolidate into defensive positions but can't advance. The Dutch government evacuates. Queen Wilhelmina flees to Britain. The entire operation fails to achieve its strategic objective. Rotterdam presents a different scenario. The 1st Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment, a Fallschirmjäger unit, despite the confusing designation, drops near the Maas River bridges with orders to seize and hold the crossings. The drop succeeds. The bridges are captured intact. Then reality sets in. The battalion is surrounded. Dutch forces converge on the German-held bridges from multiple directions. What follows is a 3-day siege, 1 battalion holding against an entire city's garrison plus reinforcements. The Fallschirmjäger dig in, fortify the bridge approaches, repel attack after attack. Ammunition dwindles. Casualties mount. They can't withdraw. Their orders are explicit. Hold at all costs. Relief forces are coming, somewhere to the east, pushing through Dutch defences. The paratroopers hold, and hold, and hold. By May 14th, when Wehrmacht armoured units finally break through to Rotterdam, the Fallschirmjäger have suffered over 400 casualties holding those bridges. The survivors, hollow-eyed from 3 days of continuous combat, barely react when German tanks roll across. They've completed their mission. The cost was horrific. Nobody seems to care about the costs. The bridges were held. The operation succeeded. Another data point confirming that airborne operations work, conveniently ignoring the casualty rate. The Rotterdam bombing, which destroyed the city centre and killed nearly 900 civilians, occurred while Fallschirmjäger still held the bridges. The Luftwaffe bombardment was intended to support the paratroopers, to break Dutch resistance and enable German breakthrough. Instead, it became a war crime that haunted Germany's international reputation. For the Fallschirmjäger on the ground, the bombing meant survival. Dutch forces reeled from the attack, organised resistance collapsed, surrender followed quickly. But the ethical stain was indelible. Post-war, many Rotterdam veterans struggled with complicity, with the question of whether their mission justified the bombardment. The standard Wehrmacht defence, "We followed orders, we weren't responsible for Luftwaffe actions," rang hollow when the bombardment directly enabled their relief. This moral ambiguity would follow the Fallschirmjäger throughout the war. They were soldiers doing soldiers' work, but they worked for a regime that routinely committed atrocities, and their successes enabled further atrocities. The clean distinction between military professionalism and Nazi barbarism, which some veterans tried to maintain post-war, collapsed under scrutiny. You couldn't drop into occupied territory, fight beneath the swastika, and claim innocence from what followed. May 14th, 1940. Final tally for the Holland operations. Approximately 4,000 Fallschirmjäger committed, over 1,100 casualties, 27% killed, wounded, or captured. In conventional military terms, those losses in 5 days of fighting indicate a force close to shattering, but Göring doesn't present it that way. His propaganda emphasizes the strategic outcome: bridges captured, key terrain seized, Dutch surrender forced. The casualties become evidence of heroism rather than warning signs of unsustainable doctrine. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry produces newsreels showing triumphant paratroopers, emphasizing youth, courage, and modernity. The films screen across Germany and in occupied territories. They're shown in neutral countries to demonstrate German military prowess. The message is clear. Germany has invented a new form of warfare, and nothing can stop it. What the newsreels don't show: the body bags, the hospitals full of wounded, the shattered battalions withdrawn for reconstitution. What they don't mention: Fort Airborne succeeded because it was a glider assault using specialized weapons, not a parachute operation. The larger drops, the actual test of parachute doctrine, produced horrific casualties and near failure. History remembers Airborne. The lesson everyone drew was wrong. Inside the fortress, after the surrender, Belgian officers examined the breech cupolas with shocked recognition. The hollow charge technology was theoretical, something engineers discussed but hadn't seen operationalized. The Germans had developed, deployed, and successfully used shaped charge explosives in combat operations, demonstrated a technological sophistication that alarmed Allied military observers. Fort Airborne had been designed to resist sustained bombardment from heavy artillery. Nobody had considered that an assault force might land directly on top of it carrying weapons specifically designed to defeat its defenses. The psychological impact of the fortress falling in under 30 hours before conventional German forces even reached it shattered Belgian military morale. If Airborne could fall, nowhere was safe. This psychological effect magnified the tactical success. The Germans had proven that modern fortifications, no matter how powerful, could be neutralized by vertical assault using the right tools. Of course, the right tools in this case were experimental explosives, extensive reconnaissance, perfect execution, complete surprise, and frankly stunning courage from 78 men willing to land on top of an enemy fortress in the dark. How replicable was that combination? Student wondered. Goering didn't care. Success proved the concept. Expand the program. Hitler's response to the Low Countries operations was predictable: euphoria. He personally decorated the Airborne assault force, awarded Knight's Crosses to the commanders, promoted student to General der Flieger. The Führer's fascination with technology and dramatic operations found perfect expression in parachute troops. Here was visible proof that Germany was rewriting military rules, that conventional wisdom was obsolete, that Nazi innovation trumped decadent Allied conservatism. Never mind that British and French forces were retreating more due to army breakthrough at Sedan than airborne operations in Holland. Never mind that Rotterdam Bridge was held at costs that would bankrupt any military if sustained. Never mind the tactical flaws that Norway and Holland had revealed. Hitler saw spectacle and victory. That's all he needed to see. Goering, basking in reflected glory, promised greater operations. Student, more sober, requested time to absorb lessons, reconstitute units, address the persistent equipment and doctrine issues. He got partial agreement the Fallschirmjäger would pause for training and reinforcement, but planning had already begun for the next operation, the biggest yet. Crete. The entire 7th Flieger Division plus reinforcements. Objective: seize an entire island by airborne assault alone. Student read the preliminary plans with dread. The success at Airborne created a dangerous precedent. It convinced German leadership that surprise and audacity could overcome material disadvantage. The 78 men who landed on the fortress roof succeeded because the Belgians didn't know they were coming, didn't expect attack from above, and had no doctrine for responding to it. Once, you get that advantage once. Then the enemy adapts. By May 1940, every Allied commander knew about German parachute troops. The surprise was gone. Future operations would face prepared defences, forewarned commanders, troops who'd been briefed on anti-airborne tactics. This should have influenced German planning, should have caused doctrine to shift towards smaller, more focused operations where surprise could still be achieved. Instead, the lesson drawn was bigger is better. If 78 men could take a fortress, what could 8,000 men take? The answer, as Crete would demonstrate, was horrific casualties. But in May 1940, drunk on victory, nobody in German high command wanted to hear warnings. The Fallschirmjäger had proved themselves. Now they would prove themselves again, at larger scale. The mythology of invincibility, born at Airborne, was about to meet reality at Maleme. The collision would be devastating. 60,000 German troops poured into Holland and Belgium in May 1940. The Fallschirmjäger totaled perhaps 4,000 of that force, less than 7%. Their tactical contribution was real, but limited. They seized key bridges and airfields, enabling faster Wehrmacht advance, but the decisive breakthrough occurred at Sedan, where German armour punched through French lines, not because of airborne operations but because of superior armour tactics and Allied command failures. Yet the popular narrative, reinforced by German propaganda, emphasized the parachute troops. Why? Because they were visible, dramatic, and symbolically powerful. Newsreel cameras could film men falling from the sky. They couldn't effectively film armour tactics or communicate the complex reality of combined arms breakthrough. The Fallschirmjäger became the public face of German victory, overshadowing their actual contribution. This mismatch between reputation and reality would plague them for the rest of the war. They'd be assigned missions justified by mythological capabilities rather than actual capacities. They'd be held to standards no military unit could reasonably meet. And when they inevitably failed, because every unit fails, eventually the failure would seem more catastrophic because expectations were impossibly high. Eben Emal's success was the best and worst thing that ever happened to the Fallschirmjäger. It proved they could accomplish the incredible. It also ensured they'd be expected to keep doing so over and over until nothing remained but the mythology and the corpses. May 20th, 1941. 8 o'clock in the morning. Hauptmann Walter Gericke watches the Cretan coastline emerge through the dust-streaked window of his Junkers 52 transport. Below, Maleme Airfield is visible, a strip of dirt runway near the coast, hills rising immediately behind it. Intelligence reports indicated light British presence, scattered defenders, quick victory. Gericke doesn't believe intelligence reports anymore. He's read the after-action analyses from Holland, seen the casualty figures from Rotterdam, but orders are orders. His battalion, part of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Regiment, will jump directly onto Maleme Airfield, seize the runway, hold it for follow-on, glider landings, bringing heavy weapons. Simple plan. Gericke checks his equipment one last time: pistol, grenades, combat knife. His rifle will fall separately in a weapon container, assuming he survives landing and can locate it. The Junkers drops to jump altitude, 300 meters. The dispatcher opens the door. Mediterranean sun floods the cargo bay. Below, on the hills surrounding Maleme, New Zealand troops wait in trenches, weapons trained on the sky. They've been expecting Germans for 3 days. Ultra-intelligence intercepts decoded German plans. The Commonwealth defenders know exactly where the paratroopers will land, exactly when they're waiting. The green light flashes. Gericke jumps into a slaughter. The first wave, 3,000 paratroopers spread across 4 drop zones. Maleme, Shania, Rethymno, Heraklion, hit the ground into withering fire. New Zealand, British, and Australian troops, forewarned and dug in, opened fire before Germans exited their aircraft. Paratroopers dangling from parachutes made perfect targets, slow-moving, unable to evade, silhouetted against blue sky. Men died before reaching the ground, bodies still in harness, swinging like grotesque pendulums. Those who landed alive scrambled for cover, desperately seeking weapon containers, while machine gun fire kicked up dust around them. At Maleme, Gericke's battalion scattered across a 1,000-metre drop zone under direct observation from New Zealand positions on Hill 107. Every paratrooper who stood up to run for weapons was targeted. Every group that clustered together was engaged by mortars. The kill zone was perfect. New Zealand 22nd Battalion, defending Maleme, was outnumbered 3-1 on paper, but for the first 90 minutes of battle, they held every advantage. Cover, prepared positions, foreknowledge of enemy plans. The Germans had numerical superiority, airborne mobility, and courage. None of it mattered against troops who knew they were coming. Prison Valley, the Chania drop zone, was worse. Named for a Greek penal facility in the valley centre, the drop zone was surrounded by high ground occupied by British and Greek troops. German transport aircraft flew directly over those positions to reach the drop zone, taking anti-aircraft fire the entire approach. 3 Junkers 52s were hit and exploded mid-air, burning wreckage tumbling from the sky, with screaming paratroopers still inside. 1 aircraft hit in the fuel tanks, managed to reach the drop zone before exploding. Men jumped from the burning aircraft, parachutes deploying normally. Then the transport blew apart behind them in a fireball that consumed several descending paratroopers. On the ground, British gunners of the 156th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Battery depressed their 3-inch guns to zero elevation and fired directly into transport aircraft at point-blank range. It was against Doctrine. Anti-aircraft guns were for high-altitude bombing raids, not ground targets. But desperation breeds innovation. The guns fired high-explosive shells designed to detonate at altitude, fired directly into aircraft fuselages at 800 meters range. They simply blasted the Junkers apart. By 10 o'clock in the morning, Prison Valley was littered with burning aircraft wreckage and hundreds of dead paratroopers. The survivors, scattered and disorganized, attempted to consolidate, but British counterattacks kept them fragmented. The drop that should have captured Chinatown and the coastal road turned into a desperate struggle for survival in an exposed valley. May 21st. The second day, German commanders realized the airborne assault is failing. Casualty reports from all 4 drop zones indicate 30 to 40% losses, the kind of attrition that shatters offensive capacity. Student, commanding from Greece, faces a terrible choice: withdraw and admit defeat, or commit reserves and accept further bloodshed. Wehrmacht doctrine dictates withdrawal, don't reinforce failure. But Hitler has personally invested in this operation, declaring that Crete must fall to deny Britain a Mediterranean base. Student knows that withdrawing means career-ending disgrace, probably relief of command, possibly worse under a regime that doesn't tolerate failure. He commits the reserves. More waves of paratroopers jump into the same killing grounds. Meanwhile, at Malemi, something unexpected happens. New Zealand 22nd Battalion, despite repelling the initial German assault, receives garbled communications suggesting their position is threatened. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Leslie Andrew, makes a fateful decision: withdraw from Hill 107 to consolidate defensive lines around the airfield perimeter. It's tactically sound: consolidate, prevent encirclement, maintain cohesion. It's strategically catastrophic. Hill 107 overlooks Malemi Airfield. With New Zealanders gone, Germans occupy the hill by dawn, May 22nd. Now Germans control high ground overlooking the airfield. May 22nd, 2 o'clock in the morning, Guericke's surviving officers, his battalion, has lost nearly 60% strength, organise a desperate night assault, attack through darkness toward Malemi Airfield, seize the runway before New Zealanders realise Germans hold the hill. It's madness, but it's the only option. The survivors, fewer than 200 men from an original 450, advance down the slope in darkness. They expect annihilating fire, prepared positions, coordinated defence. Instead, they encounter confused skirmishing, scattered resistance, chaos. The New Zealanders, having withdrawn from Hill 107, haven't fully reorganised new positions. The Germans exploit the gap, push through, reach the airfield perimeter. By dawn, May 22nd, Fallschirmjäger control Malemi Airfield, barely precariously, but control it. Student, receiving reports, makes the critical decision: land transport aircraft on Malemi under fire, bring in reinforcements from the 5th Mountain Division. It's insane. The airfield is still under British artillery fire. Landing aircraft will be sitting targets. But the alternative is watching the entire operation collapse. The first Junkers 52 lands at Malemi at 8:30 in the morning, carrying 40 mountain troops. British artillery immediately opens fire. The transport is hit, catches fire, but troops scramble out. More transports land. Many are destroyed. But some get through, delivering troops, ammunition, heavy weapons. It's aerial logistics under combat conditions, aircraft shot to pieces on the runway, but each one deposits troops before being destroyed. May 22nd through 26th, the battle transitions from airborne assault to conventional ground combat. 5th Mountain Division pours through Malemi, advancing along the coast toward Chania. Commonwealth forces, initially successful in repelling paratroopers, now face reinforced German troops with artillery and air support. The New Zealand and British brigades fight brilliantly, conducting fighting withdrawals, inflicting heavy casualties, but they're outnumbered and outgunned. German Luftwaffe has air superiority. RAF aircraft withdrew to Egypt after losing too many planes. Royal Navy attempts to interdict German sea convoys bringing additional troops, but Luftwaffe dive bombers sink 3 cruisers and 6 destroyers. The Navy withdraws. Crete's defenders are isolated. By May 25th, Commonwealth commanders realise the position is untenable. Withdrawal begins, troops streaming south across mountains toward evacuation beaches. The Royal Navy, despite horrific losses, returns to evacuate troops. May 27th, the evacuation begins. Germans harass the retreat. Luftwaffe bombs the beaches. But approximately 15,000 Commonwealth troops escape to Egypt. Another 12,000 are captured. Crete falls to Germany. Victory, but at what cost? The butcher's bill for Operation Merkur, the Crete invasion, devastated the Fallschirmjäger. Of approximately 8,100 paratroopers who jumped on May 20th through 22nd, nearly 4,000 were killed or missing by campaign's end, another 2,000 wounded. Total casualty rate, 49%. Entire battalions ceased to exist. The 3rd Fallschirmjäger Regiment, which spearheaded the Malami assault, lost 65% of its officers and 52% of its enlisted men. Student's own son was killed in the fighting. The 7th Flieger Division, the core of German airborne forces, was shattered. It would be rebuilt on paper, but never again at the quality and cohesion it possessed before Crete. German High Command classified Merkur as a victory. Allied forces evacuated. Germany occupied another strategic island. Mediterranean security was enhanced. But Hitler, reading the casualty reports, reportedly told student, "The day of parachute troops is over." Crete proved that the parachute arm is a surprise weapon, and the surprise weapon has now lost its surprise. The fundamental flaw in airborne doctrine was exposed. You can't surprise people who know you're coming. And after Crete, everyone knew Germany had parachute troops and how to fight them. The individual stories from Crete are testimonies to courage and futility. Paratroopers landing in olive groves and being bayoneted by Cretan civilians while still tangled in parachute harness. New Zealand soldiers advancing with fixed bayonets against wounded Germans who couldn't retreat. British troops, out of ammunition, fighting with rocks and helmets and sheer desperate fury. A German medical officer treating wounded from both sides in a shot-up farmhouse, protected temporarily by mutual exhaustion. Gericke, leading his decimated battalion, finding 30 of his men executed after surrender, whether by Cretan irregulars or British troops. He never knew. The reprisal executions that followed, Germans shooting Cretan civilians in revenge, beginning a cycle of atrocity that poisoned the occupation. There was no clean narrative from Crete, no heroic story that justified the bloodshed. It was butchery dressed in military language, a tactical victory that achieved nothing strategic. Britain still controlled Egypt and the Suez Canal. Germany gained an island it couldn't defend if the Allies returned in force. Student knew it, the survivors knew it, but nobody could say it officially. Goering declared victory. Goebbels produced propaganda. The Fallschirmjäger were heroes with a 49% casualty rate. The tactical lessons from Crete should have revolutionized airborne doctrine, but Germany never conducted another large-scale parachute operation in the West. Hitler's order was explicit: no more divisional-level airborne assaults. The risk-to-reward ratio was unacceptable. Airborne forces would be retained, even expanded, but employed as elite ground infantry, not as parachute troops. This decision, made in June 1941 as Germany prepared to invade the Soviet Union, fundamentally altered the Fallschirmjäger's identity. They were paratroopers who would rarely, eventually never, parachute again. The training pipeline still required jump qualification. 6 weeks of parachute school at Wittstock remained mandatory. New recruits still learned to pack parachutes, execute proper exits, control their descent. But after qualification, most Fallschirmjäger never jumped operationally. They became extraordinarily expensive infantry, trained for a mission they'd never perform. The organizational inertia was tremendous. Goering couldn't admit that his premier force, the formation that justified Luftwaffe control of ground troops, was now just infantry in different uniforms. So the fiction continued. These were airborne forces held in readiness for the next great parachute operation, the operation that would never come. May 27th, 1941, the last Commonwealth troops evacuate from Crete's southern beaches under German air attack. Royal Navy destroyers crowd the shoreline, taking on exhausted soldiers while Stukas dive-bomb the ships. HMS Kelly, already damaged, takes a direct hit and capsizes, drowning dozens of evacuated troops who'd survived the ground campaign only to drown inside of rescue. On the northern coast at Malami Airfield, Fallschirmjäger survivors watch transport aircraft land, bringing supplies and reinforcements now that victory is secured. The survivors look like ghosts, hollow-eyed, filthy, many wounded, all traumatized. They'd achieved the impossible, seizing an island by airborne assault against a numerically superior defender. They'd proven German tactical brilliance, airborne doctrine's potential, the power of courage and determination, and in proving it, they'd killed their mission. There would be no more Cretes. The Fallschirmjäger would fight for 4 more years, from North Africa to France to Germany's ruins, but never again as what they'd trained to be. The paratroopers were grounded, the eagles would fight in the dirt. Everything that followed was epilogue to Crete's disaster. The most successful failure in military history. July 1941, Ramke Parachute Brigade forms from Crete survivors at assembly areas in Greece. General Major Hermann Bernhard Ramke, a hard-faced veteran of World War I, inspects the men selected for his new command. These aren't fresh recruits. They're survivors, scarred, limping, haunted by memories of Cretan killing fields. Ramke himself jumped at Crete with the 4th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, saw the slaughter firsthand, earned his command through being one of the few senior officers who lived. Now he's tasked with building a parachute brigade that will deploy to North Africa as ground troops. No parachutes issued, no airborne training conducted. Just elite infantry wearing the distinctive Fallschirmjäger tropical uniform, heading to the desert to reinforce Rommel's Afrika Korps. The irony isn't lost on Ramke. He'd spent 18 months training paratroopers for airborne assault. Now he's leading them into conventional ground combat in terrain where parachute insertion would be suicidal even if ordered. The War Ministry paperwork still designates them as airborne forces. Everyone understands the designation is bureaucratic fiction. The Fallschirmjäger are becoming something new or reverting to something old. Elite infantry, nothing more, nothing less. The transformation accelerated through late 1941 and into 1942. Student promoted despite Crete's casualties, received orders to expand the Fallschirmjäger into a full corps structure, not because Germany planned more airborne operations, but because elite formations were politically valuable and Goering wanted to preserve Luftwaffe prestige. By September 1942, the reorganization produced the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division under General Lieutenant Richard Heydrich. This was the organizational template for all future Fallschirmjäger divisions. 3 regiments, each with 3 battalions. Divisional Artillery, Engineer Battalion, Anti-Tank Battalion, Reconnaissance Company. On paper, it looked like an Army Infantry division because functionally the primary difference was administrative. Army divisions reported through Wehrmacht command structures, Fallschirmjäger divisions reported through Luftwaffe channels. This created coordination nightmares. When 1st Fallschirmjäger Division deployed to Tunisia in late 1942, Army commanders had to request support through Luftwaffe liaison officers rather than issuing direct orders. The resulting delays and confusion degraded operational efficiency, but Goering refused to transfer Fallschirmjäger to Army control. These were his troops, symbols of Luftwaffe power on the ground. Administrative rationality couldn't compete with bureaucratic empire building. The recruitment crisis emerged gradually. Through 1942, Fallschirmjäger expansion relied on volunteers from Luftwaffe ranks, ground crew, trainee pilots washed out from flight school, rear echelon personnel seeking combat glory. These men maintained the traditional volunteer spirit, that sense of elite status that defined early Fallschirmjäger culture. But by 1943, casualties from North Africa and the Eastern Front depleted the volunteer pool. The Wehrmacht faced an empire-wide manpower shortage. Every branch competed for limited recruits. Goering demanded continued Fallschirmjäger expansion. The numbers couldn't be reconciled. Solution: conscription. Starting in early 1943, Fallschirmjäger divisions received conscripts, young men who'd never volunteered for parachute service, drafted directly into Fallschirmjäger regiments. They received abbreviated training 6 months instead of 18, with parachute qualification compressed from 6 weeks to 3. Jump training became perfunctory, a qualification to be checked rather than a skill to be mastered. The new recruits weren't necessarily worse soldiers than volunteers, but they lacked the self-selection that made early Fallschirmjäger exceptional. Anyone can be trained to fight. Not everyone chooses to volunteer for elite status. The difference mattered increasingly as the war ground on. Training degradation paralleled recruitment changes. Early Fallschirmjäger training, conducted at dedicated facilities like Wittstock and Braunschweig, lasted 18 months. 6 months parachute qualification, 12 months ground combat training. By mid-1943, total training time dropped to 6 months. New recruits learned basic infantry skills, conducted a handful of qualification jumps, then deployed to operational units. There was no time for the extensive small unit tactics training, the emphasis on initiative and independent action that characterized early cadres. The experienced veterans tried to compensate, bringing new men up to standard through on-the-job training. But combat is a brutal classroom with permanent exams. The quality gap was obvious to anyone paying attention. In after-action reports from Tunisia and Sicily, Allied intelligence officers noted that captured Fallschirmjäger included increasing numbers of young, poorly trained troops who claimed elite status but demonstrated ordinary capabilities. The reputation was becoming divorced from reality. The Fallschirmjäger name still commanded respect, but the substance was diluting as Germany's manpower reserves stretched thinner. By 1943, 4 Fallschirmjäger divisions officially existed: 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. On paper, this represented 60,000 elite troops, a significant force multiplier. Reality was messier. These divisions were rarely at full strength. Authorized establishment called for 15,000 men per division. Actual strength hovered around 8,000 to 10,000, with constant flux, as casualties were replaced by inadequately trained recruits. Equipment was supposed to be standardized, but chronic shortages meant divisions used whatever was available: captured French rifles mixed with German Mausers, Czech machine guns alongside MG42s, a hodgepodge that complicated supply and maintenance. The Luftwaffe administrative structure, which controlled Fallschirmjäger logistics, was less efficient than army supply chains. Fallschirmjäger units frequently reported shortages of basic equipment: boots, winter clothing, ammunition. The famous Fallschirmjäger jump smock, a practical and distinctive uniform, was often unavailable. New troops received whatever was in depot stocks. By late war, Fallschirmjäger uniforms were as varied as any Wehrmacht unit. The external markers of elite status were vanishing along with the substance. The command structure problems intensified. Ground combat required coordination between infantry, artillery, armor, and air support combined arms operations. The German army had perfected this coordination through 1939 to 1941, achieving devastating success through tight integration of all combat arms. But Fallschirmjäger divisions, under Luftwaffe control, operated outside that system. When 1st Fallschirmjäger Division fought in Tunisia alongside army divisions, artillery support required requests through Luftwaffe liaison channels to army artillery commanders. The delays were measured in hours, sometimes days. In fluid combat, hours matter. German Doctrine emphasized decentralized command junior officers, making independent decisions based on local conditions. This worked when all units operated under unified command. Fallschirmjäger divisions, reporting through separate channels, created seams in the command structure that Allied forces learned to exploit. The tactical skills of individual Fallschirmjäger soldiers couldn't compensate for systemic command inefficiencies. Elite troops operating in a dysfunctional system are less effective than ordinary troops in a functional system. Germany learned this lesson repeatedly, expensively, and apparently never absorbed it. The identity crisis was psychological as much as organizational. Soldiers joined the Fallschirmjäger to be paratroopers, to jump from aircraft, conduct daring raids, embody the cutting edge of modern warfare. By 1943, they were infantry who happened to have jump training they'd never use. Veterans struggled with this. They'd endured brutal selection, survived horrific casualties in Crete, earned their status through blood. Now, they were told that status meant fighting in trenches, like ordinary Wehrmacht soldiers. The elite designation remained, but what did it mean if you weren't doing elite missions? Morale suffered, particularly among Crete veterans who remembered when Fallschirmjäger actually parachuted. Newer recruits who'd never jumped operationally had different expectations. They joined an elite infantry force, and that's what they were. The generational divide within Fallschirmjäger ranks grew wider as the war continued. Old hands versus new recruits, each with different definitions of what it meant to be Fallschirmjäger. Unit cohesion, that intangible quality that makes formations effective, depended on shared identity. When identity becomes contested, cohesion weakens. Hermann Göring Panzer Division represented the organizational confusion at its apex. Formed in September 1942, from various Luftwaffe ground units, including Fallschirmjäger elements. It was a Panzer Division tanks, mechanized infantry, self-propelled artillery under Luftwaffe command. The absurdity was breathtaking. Panzer operations require extensive coordination with army logistics, maintenance, and tactical doctrine. But Hermann Göring Panzer Division reported through Luftwaffe channels. The division fought in Tunisia and Sicily with mixed results, individual tactical competence hampered by systemic command problems. Fallschirmjäger infantry assigned to the division found themselves supporting armor operations, a specialized task for which they had no training. The army had Panzer Grenadiers, mechanized infantry, specifically trained to work with tanks. The Fallschirmjäger were paratroopers turned infantry, now supporting armor. It was improvisation piled on improvisation, elite troops misemployed because organizational logic couldn't overcome bureaucratic boundaries. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division eventually grew to 2 divisions worth of troops, consuming resources and manpower that might have been better utilized elsewhere. But it was Göring's division, named for him personally, so it continued regardless of military rationality. Student understood what was happening and was powerless to stop it. His post-war writings, remarkably candid for a German general, described the frustration of commanding forces being systematically degraded by decisions beyond his control. He wanted smaller, better-trained units employed in specific roles where elite status mattered. Instead, he got divisional proliferation, conscript recruitment, and bureaucratic chaos. He requested transfer of Fallschirmjäger to army command, arguing that ground troops belonged under ground commanders. Göring refused. The Fallschirmjäger were Luftwaffe prestige formations, political assets as much as military units. Student adapted as best he could, focusing on maintaining combat effectiveness at unit level, even as organizational structure crumbled. His command philosophy emphasized junior officer initiative, small unit tactics, and aggressive defense. These principles would serve the Fallschirmjäger well in Italy and France. But principles couldn't overcome resource constraints, manpower shortages, and the fundamental dysfunction of Luftwaffe ground forces operating in army campaigns. The Fallschirmjäger would fight brilliantly at tactical level throughout the war. Strategically, organizationally, they were a magnificent anachronism, elite troops in a military system that couldn't properly employ them. By late 1943, the transformation was complete. The Fallschirmjäger were no longer paratroopers in any meaningful sense. They were Luftwaffe ground infantry, elite in name, deployed wherever Germany's collapsing fronts needed reinforcement. Parachute operations remained theoretically possible. Troops maintained jump qualifications. Some units practiced emergency airborne insertions, but everyone knew the truth. The Allies controlled the skies. Any German parachute operation would face air superiority fighters that would slaughter slow-moving transports before troops could deploy. The conditions that made Crete possible, German air superiority, limited enemy air defense, no longer existed and would never return. The Fallschirmjäger would fight the rest of the war on foot, shooting from trenches, defending ruins, conducting the grinding attrition warfare that characterized the Western Front from Normandy to the Rhine. They'd fight well. Veterans from Tunisia and Sicily already demonstrated that grounded Fallschirmjäger could accomplish the impossible on defense, but they'd fight as infantry. The Eagles, built to soar, would spend their last years crawling through mud. It was inevitable, predictable, and utterly tragic. The waste of potential, the bureaucratic stupidity, the refusal to adapt doctrine to reality, all these ensured that one of Germany's most capable forces would be systematically squandered. The chapters ahead would detail that, squandering battle by battle, casualty by casualty, until nothing remained but memory. November 1942, Oberleutnant Fritz Stahl watches from the transport's cargo door as North African coastline rises from the Mediterranean. Tunisia spreads below brown desert, transitioning to coastal green, a landscape Stahl has never seen, a theatre where Germany's position is already desperate before he arrives. Rommel's Afrika Korps retreats west after El Alamein, Montgomery's 8th Army pursuing. To the west, American and British forces landed in Operation Torch, squeezing Axis forces between converging armies. Ramke Parachute Brigade, Stahl's unit, represents German High Command's response. Throw elite troops into the collapsing theatre, stabilize the situation, buy time for what exactly? Nobody articulates strategic objectives beyond hold Tunisia. Stahl understands military reality better than he admits to his men. 2,400 paratroopers, however well trained, cannot hold North Africa against Allied divisions supported by overwhelming air and naval superiority. But orders are orders. The transport descends toward Bizerti airfield. Tires screech on metal runway. Mediterranean sun bakes the tarmac. Stahl deplanes thinking, we're here to die slowly rather than quickly. That's the mission. Fallschirmjäger don't surrender easily. Neither do they win when logistics, air power, and numbers favour the enemy so overwhelmingly. The Ramke Brigade deployed to Tunisia with realistic expectations, which was unusual for German forces in late 1942. These men survived Crete. They'd watched parachute operations turn into slaughter, fought desperate battles against Commonwealth troops, experienced the bleeding edge of Germany's tactical brilliance meeting Allied material superiority. They harboured no illusions about North African operations. The goal wasn't victory, the goal was delay. Hold Tunisia as long as possible, tie down Allied forces, prevent them from invading Sicily or Italy immediately after North Africa falls. Every week Tunisia holds is a week Italy has to prepare defences. Every Allied division bogged down in Tunisia is a division unavailable for operations elsewhere. It's a mission of sacrificial delay, strategically sound and personally horrifying. Stahl's company deployed to the Mareth Line, a series of French-built fortifications stretching from Mediterranean coast to Matmata Hills. The fortifications dated from the 1930s, designed to protect Tunisia from Italian Libya. Now, Germans used them facing the opposite direction, defending against British advance from Libya. The irony was thick enough to taste. March 1943. The Battle of Mareth Line begins with Montgomery's set-piece assault, overwhelming artillery, armour concentration, methodical advance characteristic of British 8th Army operations. Ramke's troops occupy key positions, reinforcing French fortifications, deploying anti-tank guns to cover approach routes. The initial British assault hits German positions with precision and power. Artillery bombardments crater forward trenches. Infantry advances behind creeping barrage, exactly by doctrine. Fallschirmjäger hold, return fire from protected positions, inflict casualties. The British, learning from years of desert warfare, don't rush. They probe, find strong points, call in artillery, reduce positions systematically. It's warfare as engineering problem, calculate force ratios, apply firepower until resistance breaks, advance, repeat. Stahl watches British professionalism with fatalistic respect. These aren't the scattered Commonwealth defenders of Crete. These are veteran troops with 3 years of desert combat experience, supported by artillery superiority that Germans can't match. The Fallschirmjäger trade casualties for time. Every hour they hold is an hour Germany retains Tunisia, but hours don't win wars. The defence collapses not through frontal breakthrough but through operational manoeuvre. While Montgomery fixes German attention at Mareth Line, New Zealand Corps conducts left-hook manoeuvre through Matmata Hills, outflanking the fortifications. Students' principle of elastic defence, trade space for time, withdraw before encirclement saves Ramke Brigade from annihilation. They conduct fighting retreat, leapfrogging positions, covering each other's withdrawal. It's what Fallschirmjäger training emphasised: movement under fire, small unit independence, aggressive even in retreat. British pursue, but can't encircle. By late March, Ramke Brigade occupies new defensive positions farther north. They've delayed British advance by 2 weeks. Cost 300 casualties from the brigade's original 2,400. Sustainable? No. Inevitable? Yes. The mathematics of attrition dictate outcomes as surely as physics. The Fallschirmjäger are buying time with blood, and the exchange rate is bankrupting Germany's elite force reserves. April 20th through 22nd, 1943, Hill 609, Jebel Tarhent. Americans call it Bald Hill for its bare, rocky summit dominating surrounding terrain. A Fallschirmjäger company, 180 men, occupies positions on the hilltop. American 34th Infantry Division, 15,000 strong, advances to seize the hill as part of the final Allied offensive to break Axis defensive lines. The battle becomes microcosm of Fallschirmjäger capabilities and limitations. Germans hold commanding terrain, prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire. Americans attack with infantry, armour, artillery, and air support. For 52 hours, 180 men hold against division-sized assaults. American artillery fires thousands of shells, P-40 Warhawks, strafe German positions. Sherman tanks advance up the slopes, get knocked out by German anti-tank guns, withdraw, return with infantry support. The Fallschirmjäger fight with discipline and desperation, knowing they're surrounded, knowing relief isn't coming, holding because orders dictate holding, and professional pride demands it. By hour 40, ammunition runs low. By hour 50, Germans are throwing rocks and using captured American weapons. American 34th Division suffers 531 casualties, taking Hill 609. When they finally overrun the position, they find fewer than 40 Germans still alive. The rest are dead or too wounded to fight. The Americans are shocked not by German resistance, they expected that, but by the cost of overcoming it. May 6, 1943. Cap Bon Peninsula. The endgame. Remaining Axis forces in Tunisia, Italian divisions, Afrika Korps remnants, Fallschirmjäger scattered across multiple units, compressed into a shrinking perimeter. Allied forces converge from three sides, Mediterranean blocking the fourth. There's no Dunkirk evacuation possible, no escape route to Sicily. German and Italian commands petition Hitler and Mussolini for evacuation authorization. Both dictators refuse. The troops will fight to the last man, demonstrating Axis determination. The troops, understanding they're being sacrificed for propaganda value, react with mix of defiant pride and bitter resignation. Ramke Brigade, reduced to approximately 1,000 effectives, conducts final stand around Tunis itself. By May 8th, ammunition is exhausted. Troops fire whatever captured weapons they've scrounged, Lee Enfield rifles taken from British dead, American Garand rifles, even French equipment from 1940. One Fallschirmjäger company defends a warehouse district using captured British Bren guns until they run out of ammunition, then fixes bayonets for final stand that never comes. British infantry, recognizing the situation, simply bypasses the position and waits for surrender. May 13th, 1943, Tunisia capitulates. 250,000 Axis troops enter prisoner of war camps. Of Ramke Brigade's original 2,400, fewer than 600 evacuated to Sicily before the collapse. The rest are dead or captured. The strategic impact of Tunisia was Allied victory. North Africa fell, opening Mediterranean to Allied shipping, providing staging bases for Sicily invasion. But the tactical impact, the lessons Allied commanders absorbed, focused on German defensive prowess. American and British after-action reports noted repeatedly, Axis forces, particularly Fallschirmjäger, fought with intensity and skill far exceeding reasonable expectations. Hill 609 became case study in elite infantry capabilities. American officers analysing the battle calculated that one Fallschirmjäger in prepared defensive positions equaled 3 to 5 regular infantry attackers. The math was brutal. If Germany deployed elite forces defensively on favourable terrain, Allied advantages in numbers and material weren't overwhelming enough to prevent high casualties. Tunisia provided preview of Italy and France campaigns where German defenders, outnumbered and outgunned, would nonetheless exact terrible costs from Allied attackers. The Fallschirmjägers' transition from airborne shock troops to defensive specialists was complete. They'd found their new role, last stand defenders who made victory expensive. The psychology of sacrificial defense shaped Fallschirmjäger culture permanently. These men weren't defending German soil or protecting families. They were holding Tunisia, a French colony on African continent, delaying an inevitable Allied victory. There was no rational reason to resist so fanatically. Surrender would have been militarily sensible, preserve trained troops for future battles where they might affect outcomes. But Fallschirmjäger didn't surrender, partly training. German military culture emphasized fighting spirit, determination, refusing defeat, partly unit pride. They were elite troops, they had reputations to maintain. Surrendering contradicted their self-image. Partly darker, Nazi ideological indoctrination taught that capture meant torture and death, that allies were barbaric enemies who'd murder prisoners, and partly simply combat momentum. Once you're fighting, survival instinct takes over. You fight because everyone else is fighting, because stopping seems more dangerous than continuing. Disentangling these motivations is impossible at individual level. What's clear is the aggregate result. Fallschirmjäger units fought significantly harder and longer than equivalent Wehrmacht formations. This made them valuable to German command fire brigades to deploy at crisis points. It also made them casualties at unsustainable rates. Fritz Stahl survived Tunisia. He surrendered May 13th with the Ramke Brigade remnants, spent 3 years in Allied prisoner of war camps, returned to Germany in 1946 to find his home city destroyed and his family scattered. Post-war, he wrote letters describing Tunisia as simultaneously the most professional and most futile campaign of his service. Professional because the tactics worked, Fallschirmjäger, defensive operations delayed Allied advance, inflicted casualties, accomplished military objectives. Futile because the strategic situation was hopeless from the beginning. No amount of tactical brilliance could overcome Allied material superiority once Germany lost strategic initiative. Stahl's letters, preserved in German military archives, reveal soldiers' eye view of elite troops being systematically expended. He describes pride in his unit's performance alongside anger at commanders who ordered impossible missions. He questions whether courage and sacrifice meant anything when directed toward doomed causes. The ambivalence runs through many Fallschirmjäger veteran accounts, pride in military professionalism mixed with recognition that professionalism served evil ends. Tunisia didn't resolve that ambivalence. It intensified it. The Fallschirmjäger fought brilliantly, achieved nothing strategic, died or were captured, and the war ground on without them. The North African campaign ended Germany's Mediterranean ambitions but prefigured the future. Sicily would follow in July 1943, Italy in September, France in June 1944. Each campaign would feature Fallschirmjäger defending, delaying, making Allied victory expensive, but never preventing it. The pattern established in Tunisia repeated across theatres. Elite German troops, in good defensive positions, extracted maximum casualties from Allied attackers, before being overwhelmed by superior numbers, firepower, and logistics. It was a losing strategy, executed brilliantly. German propaganda emphasized the heroism, the determination, the fanatical resistance that Allied reports noted. What propaganda didn't emphasize, losing slowly is still losing. The Fallschirmjäger were becoming history's most tactically proficient losers, soldiers whose battlefield achievements couldn't alter strategic realities. Tunisia demonstrated this perfectly. The campaign delayed Allied victory by roughly 6 months. Sicily invasion occurred in July 1943, rather than immediately after Axis collapse in Libya. That 6-month delay cost Germany its North African Fallschirmjäger formations, thousands of elite troops killed or captured for temporary delay. Was it worth it? Strategically, marginally. Germany used those 6 months fortifying Sicily and Italy. Humanly, impossible to justify. The men who died, buying those 6 months, died for a regime that would lose regardless. Their courage deserved better cause. Tunisia proved it wouldn't get one. July 10th, 1943, night. Major Karl Lothar Schultz watches American parachutes blossom against the dark sky over Sicily, except they're not landing where intelligence predicted. They're scattered everywhere, blown off course by Mediterranean winds that Allied planners apparently didn't account for. Schultz commands 1st Battalion, 1st Fallschirmjäger Regiment, positioned near Gela to defend against expected beach landings. Now, American paratroopers from the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment are dropping practically on top of his positions. The irony isn't lost on him. German paratroopers fighting American paratroopers, except the Americans are jumping and the Germans are dug in. This is warfare inverted. Schultz's men, veterans of Tunisia, don't panic. They engage systematically, firing at Americans still in harness, hunting scattered groups in the darkness. By dawn, Schultz's battalion has captured over 150 American paratroopers and killed perhaps 50 more. The American drop was catastrophic, scattered over 60 miles, units hopelessly dispersed, officers separated from their men. It's Crete in reverse. And Schultz recognizes every mistake from 2 years prior. The Americans are learning what Germans learned in blood. Parachute operations against prepared defenders are massacres waiting to happen. But the main event isn't the airborne insertion, it's the beach landings. July 11th, dawn. American 7th Army under Patton hits the beaches at Gela. British 8th Army under Montgomery lands farther east near Syracuse. The invasion fleet is massive, unprecedented, hundreds of landing craft, thousands of troops, naval gunfire support that turns the coastline into inferno. German and Italian forces defending Sicily total about 30,000 German troops and 200,000 Italian. But the Italian divisions, demoralized and poorly equipped, collapse almost immediately. The German divisions, including 1st Fallschirmjäger Division with 14,000 men, become the backbone of resistance. Schultz's battalion receives orders to counterattack toward Gela Beach, push Americans back into the sea before they consolidate the beachhead. It's exactly the wrong mission for Fallschirmjäger. These are elite defensive troops being ordered to conduct offensive operations against an enemy with overwhelming fire support. But orders are orders. Schultz assembles his 4 companies, fewer than 400 men total, after the night's fighting, and advances toward the sound of naval guns. The counterattack at Gela nearly succeeds, which terrifies American commanders and dooms the attackers. Schultz's battalion, reinforced by elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division including a handful of Tiger tanks, pushes through American positions on the coastal plain. By mid-morning July 11th, German forces reach within 2 kilometers of the beach. American troops, many experiencing their first combat, begin falling back toward the water. Panic ripples through the beachhead. Then, the naval guns intervene. USS Boise and USS Savannah, cruisers, with 6-inch guns, open fire at point-blank range, less than 5 kilometers from shore. The shells are designed for ship-to-ship combat at 20-kilometer range. Fired at troops 2 kilometers inland, they arrive in seconds, impacting with devastating accuracy. Schulz watches a Tiger tank, Germany's most powerful armored vehicle, take a direct hit and explode, turret flying 30 meters. His infantry companies, advancing across open ground, are bracketed by naval salvos that create zones of utter annihilation. Men simply disappear in the explosions. By noon, the counterattack stalls. By mid-afternoon, survivors withdraw. Schultz's battalion suffered over 150 casualties, nearly 40% in 6 hours. They'd pushed Americans to the brink of evacuation, then been obliterated by firepower no ground unit could counter. The lesson was clear. Allied material superiority made offensive operations suicidal. The pattern that emerged across Sicily would define Fallschirmjäger operations for the rest of the war. Mobile defense, fighting withdrawal, buying time. 1st Fallschirmjäger Division deployed across key terrain, establishing strong points along likely Allied advance routes, then conducting elastic defense hold, inflict casualties, withdraw before encirclement, establish new positions farther back. It was warfare as controlled retreat, trading Sicilian real estate for Allied blood and time. At Piano Lupo, a single Fallschirmjäger company, 120 men, held a crossroads on Highway 114 against British 50th Division for 72 hours. The British needed that crossroads to advance their supply lines. The Germans needed to delay British advance to cover the withdrawal of other units. For 3 days, 120 Germans fought an entire brigade. British artillery fired thousands of rounds. RAF Spitfires strafed the German positions hourly. British infantry assaulted repeatedly with tank support. The Fallschirmjäger fell back to secondary positions, held again. When they finally withdrew on the 4th day, 48 of the original 120 remained combat effective. The British advanced past Piano Lupo and found prepared defences at the next choke point, and the next, and the next. Every kilometre cost casualties, every day cost time, July 14th through 17th. The Catania Plain, Eastern Sicily, 1st Fallschirmjäger Division conducts textbook mobile defence against Montgomery's 8th Army. The British advance, methodically, with overwhelming firepower, exactly as Doctrine dictates. The Germans retreat, methodically, establishing successive defensive lines, exactly as Student taught them. It's warfare reduced to formula. British artillery bombardment, German withdrawal under covering fire, establishment of new defensive line, repeat. But the formula works in its grim way. Montgomery, famously cautious, refuses to advance until certain his forces overwhelm German positions. The Fallschirmjäger, knowing British caution, hold positions until the last possible moment, then withdraw. The result is advance measured in kilometres per day rather than the rapid breakthrough Allied planners expected. Sicily is falling, but falling slowly, controlled collapse rather than rout. German propaganda emphasises heroic resistance. Allied commanders fume at the slow pace. The Fallschirmjäger are doing exactly what they're supposed to. Make victory expensive, buy time for Axis forces to evacuate to mainland Italy. The Sicilian civilians caught between the armies suffered catastrophically. American and British forces, frustrated by German resistance, increasingly used overwhelming firepower in urban areas. Ancient towns were reduced to rubble by artillery and air bombardment before Allied troops entered. Civilian casualties numbered in the thousands. Fallschirmjäger troops, witnessing the destruction, responded with mix of indifference and guilt. Some soldiers considered Sicilian suffering unfortunate but inevitable collateral damage. Others, particularly veterans who'd seen years of war's devastation, struggled with complicity. They were defending positions in towns, knowing their presence would draw Allied fire onto civilian areas. The tactical logic was sound. Urban terrain offers excellent defensive positions. The human cost was horrific. Post-war, some Fallschirmjäger veterans expressed remorse about Sicily. Others maintained they were soldiers following orders, that Allied firepower caused civilian casualties, not German defensive choices. The moral ambiguity, the impossible calculus of military necessity versus human suffering, haunted many survivors. There were no good choices in Sicily, only degrees of culpability. August 17th, 1943. The evacuation across Messina Strait begins. German command planned the withdrawal brilliantly, establishing ferry operations under darkness, using anti-aircraft guns to suppress Allied air attacks, coordinating defensive positions to cover the evacuation. 1st Fallschirmjäger Division provides rearguard, the last German troops remaining in Sicily while others evacuate. It's the most dangerous mission. Hold while everyone else escapes, then somehow extract yourself. Schultz's battalion occupies positions around Messina port, defending the ferry terminals. Allied artillery pounds the area continuously. British infantry probes German lines, looking for weakness. The Fallschirmjäger hold, count the hours, watch transport after transport cross to Italy, carrying tanks, artillery, supplies. By August 16th, most German forces have evacuated. On August 17th, early morning, final Fallschirmjäger companies receive orders to cross. Schultz is among the last 200 men boarding ferries as British tanks enter Messina's outskirts. The evacuation succeeds 5,000 Fallschirmjäger extracted to Italy, compared to 30,000 total Axis forces evacuated. Not victory, but successful retreat. The distinction mattered less with each campaign. Allied after-action analyses of Sicily praised German defensive operations while condemning Allied tactical performance. American and British forces had overwhelming superiority, 180,000 invaders versus 30,000 German defenders, yet took 38 days to secure the island. Casualty ratios favoured the defenders. Allies suffered approximately 22,000 casualties, Germans roughly 10,000, including all units, not just Fallschirmjäger. The reports specifically noted Fallschirmjäger units as exceptionally difficult opponents. An American intelligence assessment stated, 1st Fallschirmjäger Division demonstrates defensive capabilities far exceeding numerical strength. In prepared positions with adequate supplies, one Fallschirmjäger rifle company can delay battalion-sized attacks indefinitely. That assessment, circulated through Allied commands, ensured that Fallschirmjäger positions would receive maximum firepower in future operations. The reputation that made them valuable to German command made them primary targets for Allied forces. Being elite had concrete costs. The tactical innovations developed in Sicily became Fallschirmjäger Doctrine, the Kampfgruppe system, where ad hoc units combined infantry, anti-tank weapons, engineers, and artillery into self-sufficient battle groups tailored to specific defensive sectors. This organizational flexibility allowed commanders to concentrate strength at critical points while holding other sectors with minimal forces. It required excellent junior officer leadership, lieutenants and captains making independent decisions without waiting for higher command. It required veteran NCOs who understood tactics and could execute complex operations with minimal oversight. It required trust up and down the chain of command. The Fallschirmjäger, through 1943, still possessed these qualities. The veteran cadre from Crete and Tunisia provided leadership. The newer troops, while less experienced, received intense on-the-job training from survivors who understood what worked. The system functioned because the human components were capable. As the war continued, as casualties mounted, as replacements became increasingly inadequate, the system would strain. But in Sicily, it worked. The Fallschirmjäger fought brilliantly, achieved every tactical objective, and lost strategically because no amount of tactical brilliance could offset Allied material superiority. The pattern was set. Italy would repeat it, so would France, so would Germany itself. August 1943, 1st Fallschirmjäger Division assembles in Calabria, southern Italy, to prepare for the next defensive campaign. Schultz's battalion, reduced to 250 effectives, receives 400 replacements, young men who completed abbreviated training, most who'd never been in combat. Schultz looks at them and sees himself 3 years earlier. Confident, untested, unaware of how war breaks people. He knows what's coming. The Allies will invade mainland Italy. The Fallschirmjäger will defend. The fighting will be harder than Sicily because Italian terrain is more difficult, more favourable to defence. More young men will die, proving that elite troops can delay defeat but not prevent it. Schulz writes in his diary, preserved in German military archives, a passage that captures the mood. We win every battle and lose every campaign. The men fight magnificently. It means nothing. We are professionals in service of futility. That night, Schulz briefs his company commanders on defensive tactics, fields of fire, withdrawal routes. The training continues. The war continues. The dying continues. Sicily taught the Fallschirmjäger they could make Allied victory expensive. Italy would teach them the cost of that achievement was their own destruction. February 15th, 1944. Dawn. Hauptmann Maximilian Baumler watches from a cave position as Allied bombers appear over Monte Cassino. Hundreds of aircraft, B-17 Flying Fortresses, B-25 Mitchells, medium and heavy bombers in waves converge on the 6th century Benedictine monastery crowning the mountain. The bombing is punishment for reports, later proven false, that Germans occupy the monastery itself. 1st Fallschirmjäger Division positions ring the monastery but aren't inside it. Students specifically ordered the religious site respected. That restraint ends at 9:30 in the morning when the first bombs fall. For 3 hours, 1,400 tons of high explosive and incendiary bombs obliterate the monastery. The ancient structure survived wars and earthquakes for 1,400 years, collapses into rubble. Baumler watches the destruction with mixed horror and tactical calculation. Horror because civilizational treasures are being destroyed. Calculation because rubble makes better defensive positions than intact buildings. By nightfall, Fallschirmjäger companies move into the ruins. Allied bombs have created the fortress the Allies feared existed. The irony approaches black comedy. The battle for Monte Cassino is about to become the most famous defensive stand of the Western Front. The strategic importance of Cassino derived from geography. The monastery sat atop a 500-metre mountain dominating Highway 6, the main route from Naples to Rome. Allied forces, advancing north through Italy, needed that highway. The Germans needed to deny it. Whoever controlled Monte Cassino controlled the Liri Valley, controlled the advance to Rome. Simple strategic logic, horrifically complex tactical execution. 1st Fallschirmjäger Division, commanded by General Lieutenant Richard Heydrich, deployed approximately 1,600 combat troops around Cassino Town and the Monastery Heights. They faced the entire Allied 5th Army, American and British divisions rotating through the assault, Indian troops, New Zealand brigades, Polish Corps. Total Allied forces committed over 4 months exceeded 105,000 men, 1,900 tanks, 4,000 aircraft. The ratio was 60-1. The terrain negated that advantage. Monte Cassino's steep slopes, boulder fields, cave systems, and commanding height made it a natural fortress. Add German engineering, interconnected defensive positions, pre-registered artillery targets, supply caches in deep caves, and it became practically impregnable to frontal assault. March 15th, 1944. The second battle. Allied command, frustrated by February's failure, tries again with overwhelming force. New Zealand Corps leads the assault, supported by Indian Division attacking Castle Hill, the fortified position below the monastery. The Allied plan requires capturing Castle Hill to enable assault on the monastery itself. Baumler's company defends Castle Hill, approaches 90 men against the division. The artillery preparation is beyond anything Baumler experienced, even in Tunisia. For hours, shells fall continuously, the entire mountain shaking from impacts. Then the assault. Indian troops advancing with bayonets fixed. Gurkha units probing for weak points. New Zealand tanks attempting to climb impossible slopes. The Fallschirmjäger fight from cave positions, firing from apertures invisible to attackers, then withdrawing through tunnels to secondary positions. When Indians overrun forward positions, German counterattacks from unexpected angles retake them. It's three-dimensional warfare, combating caves and surface positions simultaneously. The Indians are magnificent soldiers, brave and disciplined. The terrain and German preparation negate their advantages. After 4 days of continuous assault, the attack stalls. Allied casualties exceed 4,000. German losses are fewer than 200. Castle Hill remains in German hands. The static warfare that develops between battles is its own special hell. Opposing positions sometimes separated by 30 meters, close enough to hear enemy conversations, smell their cooking, throw grenades into their positions. Snipers hunt constantly. Artillery fired at pre-registered coordinates kills anyone who moves carelessly. Supply runs occur only at night. Mules carrying ammunition and food up steep trails while American artillery attempts interdiction. Casualties from these supply missions sometimes exceed combat losses. Wounded can't be evacuated during daylight. German medics work under darkness, carrying injured down the mountain to aid stations in the valley. The psychological strain is immense. No relief, no rotation, constant danger, even during quiet periods. Men develop thousand-yard stares, combat fatigue, the symptoms that later generations will call PTSD, but which Fallschirmjäger doctors in 1944 simply diagnose as exhaustion. Some soldiers break, become combat ineffective. Most endure because everyone around them endures, because unit cohesion and professional pride sustain what individual willpower cannot. April 12, 1944, Boehmler's company defends Hangman's Hill, a position between Castle Hill and the monastery, critical terrain that both sides recognize as key to the entire defensive system. American forces, taking over from exhausted British and Indian units, assault Hangman's Hill with fresh troops and massive artillery support. Boehmler has 43 men defending the position. The Americans attack with a battalion 800 men. The math is absurd. The fighting is intimate and savage. Grenades thrown across 30-meter gaps between positions. Machine gun duels at ranges measured in dozens of meters. Close quarters combat, where Germans use Soviet-designed anti-tank mines captured in Russia, shipped to Italy as improvised satchel charges. American troops advance with flamethrowers, turning cave entrances into infernos. Fallschirmjäger counterattack with submachine guns and knives. After 18 hours of continuous fighting, American battalion commander requests relief. His unit has suffered over 300 casualties and still hasn't taken Hangman's Hill. Boehmler's company has 16 men, still combat effective. They hold because surrendering doesn't occur to them, because professional soldiers don't abandon positions while capable of fighting, because sometimes courage is just stubbornness refined into military virtue. May 11th through 18th, 1944, the fourth battle. Allied command assembles maximum force. Polish 2nd Corps attacks from the north, British 8th Army from the south, American 5th Army along the coast. 25 divisions, over 100,000 troops, launch coordinated offensive. The artillery preparation is unprecedented. 1,060,000 shells fired at Casino sector in 1 week. More tonnage than the entire 1943 Italian campaign. The monastery ruins, already devastated, are pulverized into gravel. Boehmler's positions, what remains of them, are buried under rubble. Communication lines are severed. Supply routes are interdicted. German ammunition stocks dwindle. For 7 days, 1st Fallschirmjäger Division holds, but physics and mathematics are inexorable. On May 17th, Polish troops reach the monastery ruins from the north. German forces in the monastery sector, 40 men from Boehmler's original company, receive orders to withdraw. They've accomplished the mission, held Monte Cassino for 4 months against overwhelming force. Cost to Allies, 55,000 casualties. Cost to Germans, approximately 10,000 across all units defending the Casino sector. The casualty exchange ratio, 5-1, favouring defenders, demonstrates what elite troops in perfect defensive terrain can achieve. May 18th, dawn. Polish troops enter the monastery ruins, raise the Polish flag, find German wounded left behind with medical supplies, and a note from Boehmler apologising for defending so hard. The Poles, who suffered 4,000 casualties in the final week, respond with respect rather than vindictiveness. They treat the German wounded, bury the dead, and wonder at the courage required to defend for months under such conditions. Allied soldiers across the Casino sector express similar reactions, profound relief that the battle is over, mixed with respect for German defenders. The nickname Green Devils, from the Fallschirmjäger tropical uniforms visible during combat, spreads through Allied ranks. It's a term of respect, not mockery. Post-war histories will debate whether Monte Cassino was necessary, whether Allied commands squandered lives in frontal assaults when operational maneuver might have bypassed the position. The Fallschirmjäger didn't make strategic decisions. They executed tactical defense brilliantly, held the impossible position, validated their elite status through performance that bordered on superhuman. Casino became the standard by which defensive operations were judged. It also became mythology that exceeded reality. The mythology of Monte Cassino, invincible Fallschirmjäger, holding forever against any odds, created expectations that would plague the force for the rest of the war. Casino succeeded because multiple factors aligned perfectly. Ideal defensive terrain, experienced veteran troops, adequate supplies barely, and German command willing to accept tactical withdrawal when positions became untenable. Future battles would lack some or all of these factors, but High Command, intoxicated by Cassino's success, would expect similar results in worse conditions with inferior troops on less favourable terrain. The Fallschirmjäger's greatest achievement became their curse proof. They could accomplish miracles meant commanders expected miracles routinely. When inevitable failure came, when positions couldn't be held, when tactical withdrawal became route, the disappointment was greater because Cassino set impossible standards. Boehmler, surviving the war, wrote extensively about this problem. He argued that Cassino should have taught the lesson of preparation and position selection that elite troops are force multipliers only when employed correctly. Instead, the lesson drawn was that Fallschirmjäger could hold anything. The misinterpretation would cost thousands of lives. The technical aspects of the Cassino defense revealed German tactical sophistication. Defensive positions were interconnected through tunnel systems, allowing troops to shift between positions without surface exposure. Ammunition and supply caches were distributed throughout the defensive zone, so losing one position didn't compromise others. Observation posts on the heights provided early warning of Allied attacks. German artillery, though outnumbered 5-1, fired conservatively at pre-registered targets, achieving efficiency through accuracy rather than volume. Anti-tank guns were sighted to cover likely armour approaches, positioned for mutual support. Infantry strong points were arranged in depth, so penetrating the first line exposed attackers to fire from secondary positions. These weren't improvised tactics, they were doctrine perfected through years of defensive warfare. Students' influence was evident throughout. He'd been arguing since Norway that airborne troops, if forced to fight on the ground, needed comprehensive defensive training. Cassino validated his theories, but validation came at horrific cost. The men who proved students' doctrines correct were killed proving them. The aftermath of Cassino saw 1st Fallschirmjäger Division withdrawn to refit. Of the original 14,000 men deployed, fewer than 4,000 remained combat effective. Casualties totaled over 7,050%. The division would be rebuilt, receiving thousands of replacements to fill the ranks. But these weren't the veterans who held Monte Cassino. They were young recruits with abbreviated training, many conscripted directly into Fallschirmjäger units without volunteering. The new 1st Fallschirmjäger Division would carry the name and insignia of the old, but it wasn't the same force. The veterans understood this, felt it in their bones. Each major battle consumed the experienced cadre, replacing them with less capable troops. It was organisational degradation disguised as rebuilding. The divisions looked identical on paper, same structure, same authorised strength. But the quality curve declined steadily. Cassino was the apex of Fallschirmjäger defensive capability. Everything after was compromise and decline. The Green Devils had their finest hour at Monte Cassino. History would remember it forever. The troops who achieved it were destroyed in the achieving. That's the truth. Propaganda never mentions heroes die. Victories are ephemeral, and war consumes its best regardless of which side they fight for. Cassino proved the Fallschirmjäger were elite. It also ensured that fewer and fewer truly elite Fallschirmjäger would survive to fight future battles. January 22nd, 1944. Lieutenant Hermann Fischer watches Allied landing craft swarm onto Anzio beaches. Fischer commands a platoon in 4th Fallschirmjäger Division, stationed 20 kilometers inland when Operation Shingle begins. The Allied landing achieves complete surprise. German intelligence predicted operations farther south, not an amphibious end run around defensive lines. 36,000 Allied troops land on the first day, meeting minimal resistance. Fischer's division, hastily mobilizing, races toward the coast to contain the beachhead before Allied forces break out into open country toward Rome. But the Allies don't break out. They consolidate the beachhead, dig in, build up supplies. American General Lucas, commanding 6th Corps, decides caution is wise, establish strong position, resist German counterattacks, then advance. The caution saves Fischer's life and dooms Shingle to stalemate. By the time 4th Fallschirmjäger Division reaches Anzio, Allied forces are entrenched. The opportunity for quick thrust to Rome is gone. What remains is siege warfare, with Fallschirmjäger as besiegers. February 3rd through 10th, German counteroffensive. High Command assembles forces for major attack. 4th Fallschirmjäger Division spearheading assault toward Anzio beaches, supported by panzer divisions and regular infantry. The plan is audacious: break through Allied lines, split the beachhead, drive to the sea, force evacuation. It's exactly what Allies did to Germans in France 1944 will do in Normandy. But Anzio isn't Normandy. Allied forces are dug in, supplied by sea, supported by naval gunfire that German forces have no equivalent of. Fischer's battalion attacks across Pontine marshes, ground so waterlogged that tanks bog down, infantry advance in muddy chaos. Allied artillery, directed by aerial observers, lands with devastating accuracy. Then the naval guns open up. HMS Orion and American cruisers fire 6-inch shells at German assembly areas from ranges of 8 to 12 kilometers. Fischer experiences what Schultz experienced at Geller: firepower beyond anything ground forces can counter. The shells arrive with freight train roar, impact with explosions that dig craters 3 meters deep. Men disappear, units dissolve. The advance gains 1 to 2 kilometers, then stalls against prepared Allied positions. By February 10th, the counteroffensive is over. 4th Fallschirmjäger Division suffered 800 casualties in 8 days, more losses than the entire Monte Cassino month, for negligible territorial gain. February 16th. Via Anziate, the road leading from German lines straight toward Anzio beaches, Allied troops call it the bowling alley because it's straight, exposed, and swept by fire from both sides. Fischer's company receives orders to attack down the bowling alley toward the beach. It's a suicide mission dressed in operational language. The company advances at dawn, moving along the road because the surrounding fields are mined and marshy. American artillery has the road registered to the meter. Shells land with metronomic precision. The Fallschirmjäger advance anyway, because orders are orders. Because elite status means accepting impossible missions. Because sometimes military professionalism is indistinguishable from fatalism. They advance 400 meters before American machine gun fire stops them. They dig into roadside positions, return fire, call for artillery support that doesn't come. German artillery is rationed to 5 shells per gun per day, while Americans fire thousands. White phosphorus shells land, producing chemical fires that burn at over 800 degrees Celsius, incinerating anyone caught in the blast. Fischer's company retreats. Of 120 men who began the attack, fewer than 70 make it back. The attempt to retake Anzio beachhead has failed. The siege will continue for months. March through May 1944. Stalemate. 4th Fallschirmjäger Division settles into defensive positions around the fortress, the German-held sector overlooking Anzio from inland hills. The fighting becomes routine daily artillery exchanges, patrol skirmishes, small unit raids, attrition without decision. It's warfare reduced to mutual attrition, each side inflicting casualties without achieving breakthrough. The Fallschirmjäger excel at this. Defensive warfare is their strength now, refined through Tunisia, Sicily, and Cassino. They hold positions, conduct active defense, aggressive patrolling, immediate counterattacks against any Allied probe, defending forward rather than waiting for attacks. Allied forces, content with the stalemate, don't push hard. They're awaiting the planned May breakout coordinated with Cassino offensive. Meanwhile, men die daily in small numbers. Snipers, artillery, patrols gone wrong. Fischer's company loses 5 to 10 men, weekly acceptable casualties in the grim calculus of static warfare. Over 3 months, that totals over 100 casualties, essentially complete turnover of the company. The men who attacked in February are mostly dead or evacuated wounded by May. Replacements arrive, learn the positions, die or survive, get replaced. The organizational continuity is fiction. Only the company designation remains constant. May 23rd, 1944. The Allied breakout from Anzio. Coordinated with the breakthrough at Cassino, American 6th Corps attacks out of the beachhead with overwhelming force. 4th Fallschirmjäger Division, depleted by 3 months of attrition, defends as well as possible against impossible odds. Fischer's company, 45 men remaining from the original 120, holds a crossroads for 8 hours against American regiment, then withdraws when flanking units collapse. The withdrawal becomes fighting retreat across central Italy, same pattern as Sicily. Hold, delay, fall back, establish new positions. By June 4th, Allied forces enter Rome. German forces, including 4th Fallschirmjäger Division remnants, withdraw north to the Gothic line. The Anzio operation, from January landing to June liberation of Rome, costs Allies approximately 35,000 casualties. German losses are similar, but Germany can't replace elite troops easily, while Allies have seemingly unlimited reinforcements. The casualty exchange rate, roughly equal, represents German tactical failure. Elite troops should inflict disproportionate casualties. At Anzio, they didn't. The difference was operational context. Attacking at Anzio, Fallschirmjäger were mediocre. Defending, they were excellent, but they were ordered to attack, so excellence was impossible. The Anzio experience revealed the Fallschirmjäger's fundamental limitation. They were elite defensive troops, not elite offensive troops. This seems like minor distinction, but it determined operational employment. German doctrine traditionally emphasized offensive operations, attack, breakthrough, encirclement, destruction of enemy forces. The Fallschirmjäger were trained originally for offensive shock missions, parachute behind enemy lines, seize objectives, hold briefly. But post-Crete, they never conducted those missions. Instead, they defended. And they were magnificent defenders, motivated, well-trained, tactically proficient at fighting from prepared positions. But offensive operations require different skills: coordination with armor, combined arms assault tactics, breakthrough exploitation. These weren't Fallschirmjäger strengths. When ordered to attack at Anzio, they performed adequately no better than regular Wehrmacht infantry, possibly worse because their training emphasized different capabilities. This should have informed future employment. It didn't. German High Command continued assigning Fallschirmjäger to missions based on elite reputation rather than actual capabilities. The result was misemployment, wasted potential, and unnecessary casualties. The moral degradation that accompanied operational frustration manifested in increased brutality. Anzio saw reprisal executions, murder of prisoners, violations of warfare conventions by both sides. Fallschirmjäger troops, frustrated by months of stalemate and high casualties, sometimes executed wounded Allied soldiers rather than evacuating them as prisoners. Allied troops, facing fanatical German resistance, sometimes shot surrendering Germans to avoid the bother of processing prisoners. Civilian areas became free-fire zones, where anyone moving risked being shot as suspected partisan. The clean distinctions of early war combat professional soldiers fighting professional soldiers, according to recognized rules, eroded into savage struggle, where anything was permissible if it advanced the mission. Fischer's diary entries from Anzio, preserved in family archives, describe moral numbness. We do things now that would have horrified us in Tunisia. The war has changed us, made us something less than human. We follow orders, complete missions, survive. The rest, honor, restraint, decency, seems like luxury we can't afford. That moral erosion occurred across all forces at Anzio, German and Allied alike. But for Fallschirmjäger specifically, who'd considered themselves elite warriors bound by military professionalism, the degradation was psychologically devastating. June 1944. 4th Fallschirmjäger Division withdraws to northern Italy with 1,800 combat-effective troops remaining from the original 12,000 deployed to Anzio. The division will be rebuilt, again, refilled with replacements, returned to combat strength on paper, but each rebuilding dilutes quality. The Anzio veterans are scattered across the replacement division, their experience spread too thin to maintain unit cohesion. The new 4th Fallschirmjäger Division will fight through northern Italy's Gothic line, conduct competent defensive operations, hold positions as ordered, but it won't be the division that deployed to Anzio, just as that division wasn't the one that formed initially. Organizational continuity is maintained through designations, insignia, and records. Human continuity, the experienced NCOs, proven officers, veteran soldiers who make units effective, is lost in the meat grinder of attrition warfare. Fischer survives Anzio, fights through the Gothic line, surrenders in May 1945 when Germany collapses. Post-war, he refuses to discuss Anzio, tells family the memories are too painful. He attends Fallschirmjäger veteran reunions, meets survivors, maintains the bonds forged under fire. But Anzio remains topic they avoid. Too much failure, too much futility, too many comrades lost, achieving nothing. Cassino could be remembered with pride. They'd held the impossible position. Anzio was different. They'd attacked the impossible position and been slaughtered for it. The strategic verdict on Anzio is damning for both sides. Allied command squandered an opportunity, landing behind German lines but failing to exploit the advantage. German command squandered elite troops in counterattacks that couldn't succeed against Allied firepower superiority. Both sides settled into wasteful stalemate lasting 5 months. The Fallschirmjäger role at Anzio exposed both their strengths and limitations. As defenders of the fortress sector, they were exemplary small numbers holding against larger Allied forces. As attackers down the bowling alley, they were ordinary troops destroyed by firepower they couldn't overcome. The lesson should have been clear. Employ Fallschirmjäger defensively on favourable terrain, never offensively against prepared positions with fire support. Instead, the lesson absorbed by High Command was that Fallschirmjäger could handle any mission because they were elite. The misunderstanding would repeat at Normandy, in the Ardennes, at the Rhine crossings. Elite status became burden rather than advantage, reputation demanding impossible achievements. Anzio presaged this future. A failed offensive campaign using troops suited for defence, achieving neither tactical success nor strategic breakthrough, just mutual bleeding that weakened German forces without corresponding Allied gain. It was preview of Germany's 1944 experience, fighting brilliantly at tactical level, losing comprehensively at strategic level, unable to reconcile the contradiction. The Fallschirmjäger lived that contradiction most acutely. They were the best Germany had. The best wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Anzio taught that lesson in blood, and like all blood lessons, nobody learnt it properly. June 6, 1944, 2 o'clock in the morning. Oberstleutnant Friedrich von der Heydte commands 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, 3,500 men deployed around Carentan, in Normandy's Cotentin Peninsula. He's awakened by reports of parachute landings, American 82nd and 101st Airborne divisions dropping across the countryside. Von der Heydte, a Crete veteran who jumped with student in 1941, recognizes the tactical situation immediately. The Americans are repeating German doctrine from 1940. Airborne forces seizing key objectives ahead of beach landings. The difference is scale and support. At Crete, Germans dropped 8,000 paratroopers with minimal follow-on support. The Americans are dropping 13,000 paratroopers backed by the largest amphibious invasion in history. Von der Heydte issues orders: calmly assemble companies, locate American drop zones, engage before they consolidate. His troops are veterans, well-trained, positioned near critical crossroads and bridges. If they move fast, they can slaughter scattered American paratroopers before dawn. But first, reports indicate American drops are as chaotic as German drops at Crete. Troops scattered over 60 square kilometres, units hopelessly intermixed. Von der Heydte thinks, we taught them airborne warfare, now we'll teach them how to defeat it. Dawn, June 6th. The regimental picture clarifies. American paratroopers seized Sainte-Mère, Église and several bridges, but many units remain scattered. Von der Heydte's regiment engages American paratroops near Carentan, achieving initial success, several hundred American prisoners, significant casualties inflicted. But by mid-morning, everything changes. Allied naval gunfire begins, cruisers firing from 20 kilometers offshore with devastating accuracy. Fighter bombers appear, P-47, Thunderbolts, Hawker Typhoons strafing any German movement. Von der Heydte's regiment, attempting to maneuver against American positions, finds itself under continuous air attack. Trucks and half-tracks explode, infantry advancing across fields are strafed, communications vehicles are destroyed. The air superiority that enabled German success in 1940 is now Allied advantage, and the results are catastrophic. Von der Heydte's early successes against scattered paratroopers become irrelevant when he can't maneuver without being destroyed from the air. By evening, June 6th, 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment is pinned in defensive positions, unable to counterattack effectively. The initiative is lost. D-Day succeeds despite German defenders' best efforts. June 10th through 12th, Battle of Carentan. American airborne forces, consolidated and reinforced, advanced toward Carentan to link Utah and Omaha beaches. Von der Heydte's regiment defends the town with 3,500 troops against 3 American regiments, plus armor, roughly equal numbers, but massive Allied firepower advantage. The Fallschirmjäger established defensive positions in Norman hedgerow country, terrain that favors defense. Hedgerows are ancient earth banks topped with dense vegetation, creating natural fortifications every 100 meters. Machine gun teams occupy hedgerow corners, covering approaches with interlocking fire. American troops advance methodically, using overwhelming artillery to suppress German positions, then assaulting with infantry. The fighting is intimate and brutal engagements at 50 meters range, grenades thrown across hedgerows, close quarters combat where superior training shows. Fallschirmjäger are better soldiers individually than most American units. It doesn't matter. American artillery fires 30,000 shells into Carrington over 3 days. P-47 fighter bombers crater German positions hourly. Sheer volume of firepower grinds down German resistance regardless of tactical skill. June 13th. Von der Heide receives permission to withdraw from Carrington after losing 1,200 men in 3 days over 30% casualties. The American victory is expensive. American 101st Airborne Division suffers nearly as many casualties, but Americans can absorb losses. Von der Heide cannot. His regiment, withdrawing south, occupies new positions outside Carrington and prepares to defend again. The pattern is familiar from Italy: hold, delay, withdraw, repeat. Except Normandy is worse than Italy. In Italy, terrain, mountains, rivers, defensive positions offset Allied firepower advantages. Normandy's bocage country offers concealment but not protection. Artillery shells burst in treetops, showering defenders with shrapnel and splinters. Air attacks can't be evaded because clouds of dust reveal any movement. And Germans face an enemy with unlimited ammunition. American artillery fires whenever requested. No rationing, no conservation. German artillery fires 3 to 5 shells per gun per day maximum. The exchange rate is unsustainable. Von der Heide understands his regiment is being consumed, expended to buy time for what? German strategic reserve to counterattack? The reserve doesn't exist. Normandy will be lost. The question is how slowly, how expensively. His regiment's blood is the currency. July 11th through 19th. Hill 192, near Saint-Lô. 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division defends critical high ground dominating American advance routes. The division deployed to Normandy with 15,000 troops well under authorized strength but still formidable. By July 11th, attrition reduced them to perhaps 9,000 combat effectives. They've been in continuous contact for 5 weeks. No relief, no rotation, constant casualties. Hill 192 is unremarkable terrain, a low ridge commanding surrounding farmland. Tactically, it's critical. American First Army needs the hill to advance on Saint-Lô. 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division holds it. For 8 days, Americans attack with artillery, armor, infantry, and air support. Fallschirmjäger defenders dug into hedgerows and bunkers, resist with grenades, machine guns, anti-tank weapons. American flamethrower teams clear bunkers, methodically approach under covering fire, burn defenders alive, move to next position. It's warfare as industrial process, applying superior firepower to reduce German resistance incrementally. By July 19th, American forces overrun the final positions. 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division withdraws with 1,800 combat effectives, remaining 88% casualties in 6 weeks. The division is extracted from Normandy, returned to Germany for rebuilding. It will never reconstitute as an effective force. The hedgerow fighting revealed the limits of individual tactical skill when confronted with overwhelming material superiority. Fallschirmjäger soldiers were, man for man, better trained than most American infantry. German, small unit tactics emphasized initiative, independent action, aggressive defense. American tactics emphasized firepower when encountering resistance, call artillery, wait for bombardment, advance through the wreckage. German veterans sarcastically called it American tactics. Shell the position for hours, then walk through ruins. The sarcasm masked recognition that American methods worked. Superior firepower compensated for lesser individual training. Numbers compensated for tactical inferiority. And Americans could sustain casualties that would shatter German formations. The Normandy casualty ratios, roughly 2-1, favoring Germans, represented operational failure. Elite troops should achieve 3-1, 4-1 ratios. At Cassino they did. In Normandy, they couldn't, because Allied firepower and air superiority negated tactical advantages. This was the future. Allied material superiority so overwhelming that German tactical excellence became irrelevant. The psychological impact of continuous air attack cannot be overstated. German troops in Normandy faced enemy with total air superiority, zero Luftwaffe presence, beyond occasional reconnaissance flight. Allied fighter bombers attacked at will, strafing roads, bombing assembly areas, destroying supply convoys. German movement occurred only at night. Supply vehicles drove under cover of darkness, parked under trees during daylight, resumed movement after sunset. Artillery positions displaced constantly to avoid airstrikes. Infantry learned to freeze at first sound of aircraft engines, knowing movement attracted attack. Von der Heide described it as fighting with one hand tied behind our backs. Every tactical maneuver, every operational plan, constrained by knowing enemy aircraft would interfere. Meanwhile, Allied forces maneuvered freely, concentrated forces, without fear of air attack, called airstrikes whenever needed. The asymmetry was demoralizing. German soldiers felt helpless, unable to affect outcomes regardless of courage or skill. Some adapted through fatalism, except you might die randomly from air attack, focus on immediate tactical situation. Others broke psychologically, developing debilitating fear of aircraft. Combat effectiveness degraded either way. August 1944. Falaise Pocket. The remnants of multiple German divisions, including elements of 3rd and 5th Fallschirmjäger divisions, trapped by Allied encirclement. Approximately 50,000 German troops attempt to escape through narrow corridor before Allies close the pocket completely. Allied artillery and air forces pound the corridor mercilessly. Thousands of German soldiers die in the retreat, killed by shells, bombs, and strafing. The Fallschirmjäger units maintain better cohesion than most veteran NCOs, keep troops organized, officers lead breakout attempts, but organization can't overcome firepower. 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division extracts 1,800 men from Normandy. Most other German divisions in the pocket cease to exist as coherent formations. The Falaise Pocket becomes metaphor for German defeat in France, encircled, pounded by superior firepower, destroyed piecemeal. The Normandy campaign ends with Allied victory, Paris liberated, German forces in headlong retreat toward the Rhine. The cost to Fallschirmjäger formations is catastrophic. 3 divisions committed, all 3 shattered, cumulative losses exceeding 25,000 killed, wounded, or captured. None will recover their pre-Normandy effectiveness. The veteran cadre, the experienced soldiers who made these elite formations effective, are gone. Replacements will fill the ranks, units will retain their designations, but the substance, the quality that made them elite, is consumed in Normandy's hedgerows. Post-Normandy assessments by Allied intelligence officers noted that German resistance, while fierce, lacked the coordination and tactical sophistication demonstrated in Italy. Part of this reflected Allied improvements, better air-ground coordination, more effective artillery employment, accumulated experience fighting Germans, but part reflected German degradation. The Fallschirmjäger divisions deployed to Normandy weren't the formations that fought at Cassino. They were rebuilt units with higher percentages of inexperienced troops, less time for training, declining equipment quality. Veterans from Crete and Tunisia were dead or scattered across multiple formations. The institutional knowledge that enabled tactical excellence was diluted. What remained was reputation and determination, both increasingly divorced from capability. The Allies expected elite resistance, and Fallschirmjäger tried to deliver it, but reality intervened. You can't manufacture elite troops quickly. Training takes time, experience takes combat, cohesion requires continuity. Germany, by 1944, lacked time and couldn't afford combat experience given casualty rates. The Fallschirmjäger reputation persisted even as substance degraded. This gap between perception and reality would widen over the war's final year. September 1944, 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, withdrawn from Normandy with 250 effectives remaining from the original 3,500, receives 900 replacements in Germany. Von der Heide reviews the new troops and despairs. Most are 18 or 19 years old, drafted within the last 3 months, given 5 weeks training before assignment to Fallschirmjäger units. They can march, shoot rifles, follow basic orders. They lack the tactical sophistication, physical conditioning, and mental resilience that defined early Fallschirmjäger. Von der Heide implements crash training program. Experienced NCOs teach small unit tactics, veterans conduct realistic exercises, officers emphasize Fallschirmjäger traditions and expectations. It helps marginally, but you can't create elite troops in weeks. Von der Heide knows he's commanding a Fallschirmjäger regiment in name only, that the designation no longer signifies capability but history. The Green Devils of Crete are dead. What remains are conscripts wearing the same uniforms, carrying the same expectations, but lacking the substance. The war will demand miracles from these troops anyway. They'll try to deliver because that's what being Fallschirmjäger means, even when Fallschirmjäger is just designation without corresponding reality. Normandy destroyed the formations The rest of the war will destroy the mythology. Both losses are permanent. September 17th, 1944. 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Oberst Walter Haase, 2nd SS Panzer Division, stands outside his headquarters near Arnhem, watching British parachutes blossom across Dutch sky. Beside him, Fallschirmjäger liaison officers from 6th Regiment provide running commentary. These are the experts, men who jumped at Crete, who understand airborne operations intimately. They're watching Allied forces repeat every mistake Germans made in 1941. Drop zones too far from objectives, one lieutenant observes. 8 miles to Arnhem Bridge, they'll never consolidate before we engage them. Another notes, single drop, no follow-on waves immediately. They're giving us time to react. Haase listens, absorbs, issues orders. 2nd SS Panzer Division is refitting in Holland after escaping Normandy under strength, low on equipment, but veteran troops who know combat. Now they'll coordinate with Fallschirmjäger Kampfgruppen to destroy the largest Allied airborne operation in history. The irony is exquisite. Germans who abandoned large-scale parachute operations after Crete's bloodbath will teach British and Poles exactly why they abandoned it. The lessons will be written in blood across Arnhem streets. British 1st Airborne Division drops 10,000 men on September 17th in the largest single-day airborne insertion attempted by any side. The operational plan Market Garden envisions British paratroopers seizing Arnhem Bridge, holding for 48 hours until British XX Corps advances from the south. American airborne divisions drop simultaneously at Nijmegen and Eindhoven to secure intermediate bridges. It's audacious, complex, dependent on everything working perfectly. Nothing works perfectly. British paratroopers land 8 miles from Arnhem Bridge because RAF insisted on distant drop zones away from anti-aircraft guns. The decision scatters British forces, gives Germans time to react. Kampfgruppe von Tettau, a mixed force including Fallschirmjäger from training battalions, deploys to block British advance to the bridge. These aren't elite combat veterans, they're instructors, trainees, rear echelon personnel, but they understand anti-airborne tactics. Engage paratroopers immediately before they consolidate, prevent them reaching objectives. It's exactly what British did to Germans at Crete. The historical circle closes. German paratroopers turned instructors will destroy British paratroopers using lessons learned from German parachute operations failure. September 18th, British 2nd Battalion reaches Arnhem Bridge, seizes the northern approach, 800 men, holding critical objective against an entire German garrison, but the rest of 1st Airborne Division is scattered, blocked from reinforcing them. Kampfgruppe von Tettau, reinforced by 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment elements arriving from Germany, surrounds British landing zones. The Germans apply Crete lessons methodically. Artillery pounds, British positions, Germans have adequate artillery, British paratroopers have only light weapons they carried or dropped with. German infantry probes for weak points, identifies British dispositions, reports back. Armoured cars and self-propelled guns engage from standoff range where British anti-tank weapons are ineffective. It's professional military problem solving. Identify enemy capabilities, exploit weaknesses, apply local superiority at chosen points. By September 19th, British forces are split, 1 battalion isolated at the bridge, the main body surrounded at Oosterbeek. The situation is Crete inverted. Airborne forces drop behind enemy lines, isolated, facing coordinated ground response, air support negated by weather. The outcome will be identical. September 19th through 25th, the siege of Oosterbeek, British 1st Airborne perimeter shrinks daily under German pressure. 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, now arrived in full-strength 2,100 troops, takes primary assault role. These men know what British are experiencing because they've experienced it themselves at Crete. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost's battalion at the bridge holds for 4 days longer than anyone expected before being overrun September 21st. German respect for British tenacity is genuine. These are fellow paratroopers, professional soldiers, fighting with courage that mirrors German experience. But respect doesn't translate to mercy. Frost's survivors, fewer than 300 from 800 original surrender, when ammunition exhausts. The remaining British at Oosterbeek perimeter hold until September 25th, waiting for XXX Corps relief that arrives too late. Canadian engineers evacuate survivors across Rhine under cover of darkness. Of 10,905 British airborne troops deployed, only 1,485 escape. The casualty rate, 83%, killed, wounded, or captured, exceeds even Crete's horrific numbers. The Fallschirmjäger role at Arnhem was technically subordinate, 2nd SS Panzer Division commanded overall defence but tactically critical. 6th Regiment provided the experienced infantry that contained British landing zones, prevented breakout toward the bridge, maintained pressure during the siege. Their expertise in anti-airborne operations derived from bitter experience. Every tactical decision: engage immediately, isolate landing zones, interdict reinforcement, apply sustained pressure, reflected lessons learned at Crete. Von der Heide, commanding 6th Regiment, later wrote that Arnhem vindicated pre-war German airborne doctrine. The doctrine was correct. Parachute forces could seize objectives behind enemy lines. The problem was vulnerability to immediate counterattack. At Ebenemeyer, surprise was complete. Relief arrived in hours. At Crete, surprise was partial. Relief took days. The operation barely succeeded. At Arnhem, British achieved surprise, but relief never came. Allied paratroopers learned what Germans learned in 1941. Airborne operations are existentially risky, dependent on factors outside paratrooper control, and sustainable only if relief is guaranteed. The British gambled relief would arrive. It didn't. The gamble cost them a division. The moral complexity of Arnhem troubled some Fallschirmjäger veterans. They destroyed fellow paratroopers, men who'd trained as they'd trained, who embodied same military culture and professional ethos. Post-war, German and British airborne veterans held joint reunions, acknowledged mutual respect, avoided recriminations. But during battle, that respect was suspended. Germans killed British with efficiency and determination, applied lessons from Crete to inflict maximum casualties, celebrated victory when British evacuated. Only later did complexity emerge. Von der Heide's post-war writings express admiration for British courage alongside satisfaction at German victory. He argued that Arnhem proved airborne doctrine's validity. Properly executed, paratroopers could seize objectives while demonstrating the doctrine's limitations. German High Command abandoned large airborne operations after Crete because risks exceeded benefits. British and Americans, learning same lessons at Arnhem and other operations, reached similar conclusions. Paratroopers would remain valuable as elite infantry, special operations forces, shock troops. But the era of division-sized parachute assaults ended with Arnhem. The operational concept was too fragile, too dependent on perfect execution and enemy incompetence. October 1944, 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment withdraws from Arnhem sector, deploys to defensive positions along Dutch-German border. The regiment suffered approximately 400 casualties at Arnhem, 19% sustainable by 1944 standards. They'd proven that experienced troops, properly employed, could destroy superior numbers through tactical proficiency. But proving it at Arnhem changed nothing strategically. Germany was losing the war. Allied forces, despite Market Garden's failure, controlled France and Belgium, pushed toward German borders, would inevitably invade Germany itself. The Fallschirmjäger could win tactical battles indefinitely. It didn't matter. Strategic defeat was assured by material imbalance, Allied industrial capacity, Soviet advances in the east. Von der Heide understood this. His troops understood it. They fought anyway, because surrender wasn't acceptable, because professional soldiers complete missions regardless of strategic hopelessness, because sometimes fighting is reflex stronger than reason. Arnhem was the Fallschirmjäger's last unambiguous victory, a tactical triumph that changed nothing. Everything after would be defeat dressed in temporary success, delaying actions that delayed inevitable collapse. The battles ahead, Aachen, the West Wall, Hürtgen Forest, the Ardennes, would demonstrate both Fallschirmjäger tenacity and their ultimate irrelevance to Germany's fate. The psychological impact of Arnhem on Allied airborne forces was profound and lasting. American and British paratroopers had considered themselves elite, rightful heirs to military innovation that Germans pioneered. Arnhem demonstrated they were as vulnerable as Germans had been at Crete, that airborne operations against prepared defences were suicidal, that courage and training couldn't overcome fundamental operational vulnerabilities. Post-Arnhem, Allied airborne deployments became more conservative, smaller operations, closer objectives, guaranteed relief. The grand vision of parachute armies seizing strategic objectives was abandoned as impractical. Instead, paratroopers became specialized infantry deployed for specific tactical missions where their training provided advantages. This was exactly the trajectory German Fallschirmjäger followed after Crete. Both sides learned identical lessons through identical mistakes. The learning cost thousands of lives. The tragedy of Arnhem, like the tragedy of Crete, was that professional soldiers died, proving what careful analysis should have revealed. Parachute operations are inherently risky, rarely worth the cost, best avoided except in unique circumstances. The Germans learnt this lesson painfully in 1941, the British learned it painfully in 1944. The paratroopers on both sides paid tuition. November 1944, 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment occupies defensive positions near German border. Von der Hayti receives orders to prepare for possible offensive operations, details classified, timing uncertain. The orders puzzle him. Germany is defending everywhere. Resource shortages, constrain operations, Allied superiority is overwhelming. What offensive could Germany possibly conduct? The answer, when it comes, will shock him. A massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes, aimed at splitting Allied forces and recapturing Antwerp. The plan is delusional, strategically nonsensical, operationally impossible given Germany's circumstances. But Hitler has ordered it, which means it will happen regardless of military reality. Von der Heide will be ordered to conduct a parachute drop, the first German airborne operation in the West since 1941, supporting the offensive. The mission will epitomize everything wrong with German strategy in late war. Ambitious plans divorced from available resources. Operations based on wishful thinking rather than reality. Elite troops squandered on impossible missions because retreat isn't acceptable. Von der Heide will obey orders, conduct the operation, watch it fail predictably. Arnhem was the Fallschirmjäger's moment of vindication, proving they understood airborne warfare better than their enemies. The Ardennes will be their monument to futility, proving understanding doesn't matter when strategy is suicidal. The contrast between September's tactical triumph and December's strategic disaster perfectly captures the Fallschirmjäger's experience. Brilliant soldiers, incompetent leadership, doomed cause. The historiography of Arnhem focuses overwhelmingly on British perspectives: heroic paratroopers, tragic failure, a bridge too far. German participation receives less attention, typically framed as SS troops defeating British forces. But Fallschirmjäger contributions were critical to German victory. Their expertise in anti-airborne tactics, accumulated through painful experience, enabled rapid German response that British planning didn't anticipate. The irony runs deeper. German paratroopers had argued since Crete that airborne operations were too risky for strategic employment. British planners, studying German airborne successes at Eben Emael and Crete, concluded the opposite, that airborne operations could achieve decisive results. They were wrong, and Germans knew they were wrong because Germans had already paid the price for that knowledge. Arnhem was preventable tragedy. British repeating German mistakes despite German experience demonstrating those mistakes' consequences. The Fallschirmjäger who fought at Arnhem felt conflicting emotions: satisfaction at tactical victory, frustration that Allies hadn't learned from German experience, sadness at necessary destruction of fellow paratroopers. War rarely offers moral clarity. Arnhem offered none. Germans won, British lost, thousands died, and the war continued grinding toward Germany's inevitable defeat. Tactical victories, even impressive ones, couldn't alter strategic realities. The Fallschirmjäger proved this repeatedly. Arnhem was just the most ironic example, destroying enemy paratroopers while themselves being destroyed by larger strategic forces they couldn't affect. October 2nd, 1944, 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division remnants, 900 combat effectives extracted from Normandy's disaster, arrive at Aachen under cover of darkness. Hauptmann Gerhard Wilk, commanding the city's garrison, watches them disembark from trucks with mixed relief and despair. Relief because Aachen's defense needs every trained soldier available. Despair because 900 men, even elite troops, cannot hold a major city against the American 1st Infantry Division's assault. Aachen was Charlemagne's capital, the Holy Roman Empire's coronation city, a place of historical significance that Hitler has declared must be defended to the last man. The phrase sounds dramatic in Führer directives. On the ground, it means garrison troops, elderly Volks, grenadier conscripts, Luftwaffe ground crew with minimal infantry training, local police pressed into military service, supported by Fallschirmjäger, stiffening detachments. The concept is grimly practical. Distribute experienced Fallschirmjäger throughout inexperienced units, one squad per company to provide tactical expertise and prevent collapse under pressure. Its admission that Germany lacks trained troops, can't field divisions of elite soldiers anymore, must dilute quality to extend coverage. 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division which deployed to Normandy as coherent formation, now disperses across Aachen's defense as organizational glue, holding together units that would otherwise disintegrate. The American assault begins October 11th. 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, veteran formation with campaigns in North Africa, Sicily, and Normandy, attacks Aachen from 3 sides, with overwhelming firepower. Artillery fires thousands of shells daily. P-47, Thunderbolts, bomb specific buildings on request. Sherman tanks reduce fortified positions methodically. The defending Volksgrenadiers would collapse immediately without Fallschirmjäger stiffening, but 3rd Division's veterans, embedded in Volksgrenadier companies, hold positions through discipline and example. American after-action reports note the pattern. German resistance surprisingly effective given garrison's overall poor quality, sustained by small numbers of elite troops who counterattack aggressively, prevent American breakthrough, maintain defensive coherence. One American battalion commander describes engaging German position held by Volksgrenadiers, making good progress, beginning to collapse enemy defense, then Fallschirmjäger squad counterattacks, retakes lost ground, stabilizes the line. This pattern repeats across Aachen. Elite troops function as defensive fire brigade, rushing to crisis points, patching holes, preventing catastrophic collapse. It's tactically effective and strategically futile. The ratios are impossible. 900 elite troops supporting 5,000 poor-quality soldiers cannot hold indefinitely against 15,000 attackers with unlimited ammunition. October 15th, Crucifix Hill. This fortified position overlooks Aachen's eastern approaches, critical to the city's defense. If Americans take Crucifix Hill, they envelop Aachen from the east, cutting off garrison from reinforcement. 80 Fallschirmjäger defend the hill, a single company from 3rd Division, against regiment-sized American assaults. For 72 hours, they hold. American artillery craters the hilltop. American infantry assaults repeatedly. Fallschirmjäger fight from bunkers, trenches, rubble. When Americans overrun forward positions, Germans counterattack with grenades and submachine guns, retake them, re-establish the line. The Americans are professionals, conducting set-piece assaults with proper fire support, but terrain and German determination negate firepower advantages. Bunkers withstand direct hits, require infantry to clear with explosives or flamethrowers. Approaches to the hill are pre-registered for German artillery limited ammunition, but what they have lands with precision. By October 18th, American forces finally secure Crucifix Hill. The defending Fallschirmjäger company has ceased to exist, 65 killed or wounded, 15 retreating into Aachen itself, 3 days bought for 80 men's lives. The mathematics of defense: exchange blood for hours, hours for days. Days for what? Aachen will fall regardless. The delay changes nothing strategically, but orders specify defense to last man, so defense continues. The urban fighting in Aachen degenerates into house-to-house savagery. American tactics emphasize firepower. If Germans occupy a building, destroy the building. Artillery, tank fire, and demolition charges reduce Aachen to rubble. Civilian casualties are horrific. Thousands of residents remained in the city despite evacuation orders. Elderly, infirm, those with nowhere to go. They shelter in basements while combat rages overhead. Some are killed by German fire, some by American shells, most by the simple catastrophe of being in a combat zone. Fallschirmjäger troops, fighting from ruined buildings, occasionally encounter civilians. Some soldiers help evacuate them, others ignore them, focused on survival. A few use civilians as cover, hiding among refugee groups, drawing American fire onto non-combatants. The moral degradation that began at Anzio intensifies. Rules of war, protections, collapse when battles occur in civilian areas. Both sides commit atrocities. Germans shoot surrendering Americans. Americans shoot surrendering Germans. Civilians die indiscriminately. The Fallschirmjäger, who'd considered themselves professional soldiers bound by military convention, become participants in urban warfare's brutality. Aachen was cultural treasure. The battle reduces it to charnel house. October 20th, Wilkes Command Post, Aachen Cathedral. The cathedral is medieval masterpiece, religious site of immense historical importance. It's also excellent defensive position, stone walls 3 meters thick, commanding position, vaults that provide overhead cover. Wilkes' remaining troops, perhaps 200 effectives including 30 Fallschirmjäger, defend the cathedral and surrounding buildings against American final assault. The Americans, recognizing the cathedral's cultural value, initially try to avoid damaging it, but German resistance from the structure forces their hand. Tank destroyers fire directly into cathedral walls, creating breaches. Infantry assaults through the breaches with flamethrowers and grenades. The Fallschirmjäger squad defending the cathedral fights in the crypt, in corridors, on stairs, extracting maximum casualties for every meter surrendered. When American troops finally secure the cathedral, they find Wilk in the basement with civilian refugees he'd been sheltering. The American colonel, accepting surrender, is visibly relieved that Wilk survived. Summary execution of garrison commanders was increasingly common as frustration with German resistance intensified. Wilk formally surrenders October 21st. Of 900 Fallschirmjäger committed to Aachen's defense, approximately 300 are killed, 500 captured, 100 escape. The city is destroyed. Germany's first major city has fallen to Allied forces. The Aachen battle exposed the fire brigade tactic's fundamental limitation. You can't be everywhere simultaneously. Dispersing elite troops throughout mediocre units improved overall performance, but prevented concentration of force. When Fallschirmjäger fought as cohesive companies, they achieved force multiplication, holding positions that should have required battalions. When dispersed as individual squads, stiffening Volksgrenadier companies, their impact diluted. One excellent squad in a poor company doesn't transform the company into an excellent unit. It just means you lose excellent soldiers when the company inevitably collapses. German High Command, facing empire-wide troop shortages, had no better option. Concentrating elite troops in a few strong divisions would leave other sectors critically weak. Dispersing them extended defensive coverage at cost of dissipating their effectiveness. Both approaches were desperate expedients acknowledging Germany's manpower crisis. The Fallschirmjäger, designed as shock troops for offensive operations, became organizational adhesive, holding together defense built from increasingly inadequate soldiers. It was misuse of elite forces that reflected strategic bankruptcy rather than tactical choice. Post-Aachen, American commanders recognized that taking German cities would be grinding attritional struggles. The defense, while ultimately unsuccessful, cost Americans over 5,000 casualties, exchange rate roughly 5-1 considering German garrisons' total strength. If every German city fought like Aachen, Allied advance to Berlin would take years and cost hundreds of thousands of casualties. This realization influenced Allied strategy: bypass cities when possible, isolate them, accept their eventual surrender rather than conducting costly urban assaults. The impact on German strategy was opposite. If city defense could inflict such casualties, defend more cities, make Allies pay for every urban area, this thinking would lead to fortress city declarations, garrisons ordered to hold hopeless positions to last man. The Fallschirmjäger, because of Aachen's relative success, would be assigned to more city defences: Metz, Brest, later Breslau, and other German cities. Each defence would consume the elite troops, killing veterans who might have been more valuable elsewhere. But elsewhere didn't exist. Germany was losing everywhere. The question was speed of collapse, not whether collapse occurred. Aachen slowed collapse marginally, cost Allies casualties and time, and consumed 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division's remaining strength. Whether that exchange was worthwhile depends on perspective. From Hitler's standpoint, any delay justified any cost. From soldiers' perspective, dying to delay defeat by weeks was futility dressed in operational necessity. The symbolic importance of Aachen's fall exceeded its military significance. This was the first major German city captured by Allies, proof that Germany proper would be invaded and occupied. Nazi propaganda couldn't spin it positively. Attempts to portray Aachen's defense as heroic victory were contradicted by photographs of cities' ruins. German civilians, watching newsreels or reading accounts, understood the reality. Allied forces would devastate German cities. Garrison troops couldn't prevent it. The war was coming home. For Fallschirmjäger troops fighting throughout Germany's borders, Aachen confirmed what they'd known since Normandy. Germany would lose the war. The question was surviving until surrender. Some soldiers fought harder, believing they protected German civilians from occupation. Others fought less willingly, recognizing futility but bound by military obligation and fear of execution for desertion. The organizational cohesion that made elite units effective began eroding. 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, extracted from Aachen, would never reconstitute. Its designation persisted on paper, but the division as functional fighting force was finished. The survivors were scattered to other formations, their experience diluted, their identity as division erased. This was pattern across Fallschirmjäger formations. In late 1944, divisions destroyed, rebuilt nominally, destroyed again, until the organizational structure was pure fiction. And Fallschirmjäger designation indicated nothing about capability. November 1944, personnel depots in Germany received new conscripts designated for Fallschirmjäger replacement units. These young men, 17, 18 years old, complete 5 weeks, basic training, receive Fallschirmjäger insignia despite never attending parachute school, deploy to operational units at the front. They're told they're elite troops, successors to heroes of Crete and Casino. They're shown propaganda emphasizing Fallschirmjäger tradition and expectations. Then they're sent to positions along the West Wall or Hürtgen Forest, where they encounter veterans who look through them with hollow eyes, NCOs who don't bother learning their names because replacement life expectancy is measured in days. The veterans remember when Fallschirmjäger meant something, when soldiers volunteered, training lasted 18 months, units were elite by capability, not designation. The replacements don't understand the veterans' bitterness, or the gap between reputation and reality, or that they're filling positions in formations that are Fallschirmjäger only on organizational charts. They learn quickly. Combat is efficient teacher. The survivors, and there will be survivors, because some always survive, will understand what the veterans knew. Elite status is earned through blood, training, and experience. Germany no longer has time for the first two and is rapidly consuming the third. What remains is title without substance, tradition without capability, mythology accelerating its collision with reality. Aachen was preview. The battles ahead will complete the demonstration. November 1944. General Lieutenant Eugen Meindl, commanding 2nd Fallschirmjäger Corps, inspects defensive positions along the Siegfried Line. The West Wall, as Germans call it, is concrete manifestation of pre-war defensive thinking, 18,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and tank obstacles stretching from Netherlands to Switzerland. The fortifications date from 1938 through 39, built when Hitler expected Western defences might be needed. Then came 1940s Western offensive, France collapsed, and the fortifications became irrelevant, maintained minimally, while Wehrmacht fought in East. Now, November 1944, those neglected bunkers are Germany's shield against Allied invasion. Meindl commands 5th, 7th, and 8th Fallschirmjäger divisions deployed across 80-kilometre front. On paper, 3 divisions equals 45,000 troops. In reality, Meindl has perhaps 25,000 divisions, perpetually under strength casualties replaced slowly with inadequate recruits, but he has concrete pre-positioned firing apertures, interlocking fields of fire. The West Wall can't stop Allied advance, but it can slow it. Meindl's mission is buying time for what exactly nobody articulates. High Command promises winter counteroffensive, mysterious operation that will reverse Germany's fortunes. Meindl, veteran of Crete and Norway, doesn't believe promises. He believes concrete and casualties, trading both to delay inevitable Allied victory. The quality crisis defines Meindl's challenge. Of the 25,000 troops under his command, perhaps 30% are veterans with combat experience. The rest are recent conscripts with minimal training, many transferred from Luftwaffe ground crew because Germany's Air Force has no aircraft to crew. These former mechanics and radio operators received 5 weeks infantry training, were issued Fallschirmjäger insignia despite never attending parachute school, and deployed to frontline divisions. They can shoot rifles, dig trenches, follow basic orders. They lack infantry instincts, tactical sophistication, the hard-earned knowledge that keeps soldiers alive in combat. Meindl's solution is the Fortress Company system. Each bunker complex receives 5 veterans plus 30 conscripts. The veterans command, the conscripts execute. The system works marginally better than conscript-only units, worse than veteran formations. American attacks against West Wall positions succeed eventually, but slowly, expensively. The exchange rate, American casualties versus German favours, defence roughly 2-1. Acceptable by late 1944 standards, catastrophic compared to Casino's 5-1 or Sicily's 3-1 ratios. The decline is measurable. Elite status erodes with each battle, each replacement, each tactical victory that feels like defeat. November 16th, 1944. The Battle of Hurtgen Forest, American 1st and 9th Armies, attack through dense forest, approaching West Wall. 5th Fallschirmjäger Division defends forest approaches, using terrain and fortifications to channel American advances into killing zones. The forest is nightmare for attackers, visibility limited to dozens of meters, artillery bursts in treetops, showering shrapnel downward, navigation nearly impossible. German defenders, though outnumbered, exploit terrain ruthlessly. Bunkers hidden in forest provide strong points. Pre-registered mortar targets cover trails and clearings. Veteran NCOs position conscripts effectively, compensating for inexperience with preparation. American casualties mount horrifically, 24,000 over 2 weeks, for negligible territorial gain. 5th Fallschirmjäger Division losses are severe but sustainable. Approximately 3,000 casualties, mostly among conscript replacements. Veterans survive at higher rates because experience teaches survival skills that training can't convey. The battle validates Mindel's defensive system while revealing its limitations. The system works when conscripts man prepared positions directed by veterans. It collapses when maneuver is required, when veterans are killed, when complexity exceeds conscripts' capabilities. December 5th. Monschau sector, held by 8th Fallschirmjäger Division. American 78th Division attacks bunker lines south of Monschau, attempting to flank West Wall defenses. For 17 days, 8th Division conducts mobile defense hold bunker complexes until pressure becomes untenable, withdraw to secondary positions, counterattack when Americans consolidate. It's leapfrog retreat, trading depth for time. The Americans advance, but at crawl average less than 1 kilometer daily. Each bunker complex costs hours and casualties to reduce. Each withdrawal leaves behind mines, booby traps, pre-sighted artillery targets. Fallschirmjäger rearguards ambush American advance units, inflict casualties, escape before being encircled. It's professional defensive warfare, textbook execution of elastic defense doctrine. It also demonstrates impossibility of long-term success. Every withdrawal brings Americans closer to Rhine. German casualties, while lower than American, are irreplaceable. The math is inexorable. Attritional warfare favors the side with reserves. Germany has none. 8th Fallschirmjäger Division holds Monschau sector for 17 days, retreats December 22nd when Allied pressure becomes overwhelming, and has lost enough troops that the division designation is nearly meaningless. December 13th, Mindel's Corps headquarters meeting, staff officers review casualty reports, replacement allocations, ammunition stocks. The numbers are catastrophic. 3 divisions deployed to West Wall fighting in November have suffered cumulative 7,000 casualties. Replacement system delivered 3,000 new troops, less than half what's needed. Ammunition allocation allows 5 shells per artillery piece per day, barely enough for defensive fire missions, nothing for suppressive bombardment. Medical supplies are critical shortages, morphine, sulfur drugs, bandages all rationed. Equipment losses, machine guns destroyed, anti-tank guns knocked out, vehicles lost can't be replaced. The divisions are consuming themselves, degrading weekly, approaching point where organizational designation bears no relationship to combat capability. Then new orders arrive. Extract veteran cadres from all 3 divisions, provide them best available equipment, prepare for mysterious offensive operation. Mindel is stunned. Pulling veterans from West Wall divisions leaves skeleton forces holding critical defensive front. The offensive operation, whatever it is, better justify that risk. Nobody tells Mindel the offensive's details, just that 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment will conduct parachute drop supporting major counterattack, the first German airborne operation in 3 years. Mindel, who jumped at Crete, thinks, "We learned this lesson in blood, now we'll relearn it." The West Wall fighting from November through December 1944 epitomized late-war German defensive operations. Tactically competent, operationally futile, strategically irrelevant. Fallschirmjäger divisions executed their missions, delayed Allied advance, inflicted disproportionate casualties, maintained cohesion under pressure. None of it mattered strategically. Allied forces advanced inexorably, German defensive lines compressed, the Reich shrank. Each successful defensive action was step toward ultimate defeat, because Germany couldn't win through defense, couldn't replace losses, couldn't sustain operations indefinitely against enemies with unlimited resources. The Fallschirmjäger understood this. Veterans fighting through West Wall's bunkers expressed fatalism in letters and diaries. "We fight well and die slowly," one lieutenant wrote. "The enemy respects our skill. it changes nothing. We delay the inevitable at costs we can't afford. That clear-eyed recognition of futility coexisted with continued professional performance. Soldiers completed missions despite knowing missions meant nothing because military professionalism demands executing orders regardless of strategic hopelessness. Whether that constitutes courage or stupidity depends on perspective. Both, probably. The complexity of military service. Doing your job well when job's purpose is questionable at best. The psychological toll of perpetual retreat manifested in declining morale, increasing desertion, and deteriorating unit cohesion. Fallschirmjäger historically maintained excellent morale and low desertion rates. Elite status and unit pride created bonds that sustained soldiers through terrible conditions. By December 1944, those bonds frayed. Veterans watched conscript replacements die quickly, stopped investing emotionally in new arrivals, developed survivors' callousness that protected psychologically but degraded unit cohesion. Desertion rates, historically under 1% monthly, reached 8 to 12% in some Fallschirmjäger units, still better than Volksgrenadier divisions' 15 to 20%, but unprecedented for elite formations. Some deserters fled to Allied lines, others simply disappeared, hiding in forests or abandoned buildings, waiting for war to pass them by. The Wehrmacht's draconian punishment for desertion execution couldn't entirely suppress the phenomenon when soldiers calculated survival odds and decided desertion was safer than continued combat. That calculation itself represented institutional failure. Elite units maintain cohesion through shared identity, mutual trust, confidence in leadership. When those erode, when survival probability drops sufficiently low, even elite troops fragment. The West Wall fighting accelerated that erosion. December 15th, final preparations for the Ardennes offensive. Mindel's 3 divisions, stripped of veteran cadres, prepare to hold West Wall with skeleton forces while the offensive proceeds north. The remaining troops, disproportionately young, conscripts and older reservists, understand they're being sacrificed to guard the offensive's flank. If Allied forces attack West Wall positions during the offensive, these skeleton divisions will collapse quickly. They lack the veterans who held November and December. They're Fallschirmjäger only in designation, guard units wearing elite insignia, waiting to be overrun. But orders are orders. They occupy positions, man bunkers, prepare fields of fire. Mindel visits frontline companies, delivers speeches about duty and honor, sees hollow eyes staring back. These troops will do their jobs because they're soldiers, because desertion risks execution, because sometimes you fight not from conviction but from absence of alternatives. The Ardennes offensive will determine whether their sacrifice means anything. Spoiler, it won't. The offensive will fail, consume Germany's last mobile reserves, accomplish nothing strategic. The West Wall skeleton divisions will hold longer than anyone expects because Fallschirmjäger designation, even when divorced from reality, still carries psychological weight. But holding longer just means dying slower. The mathematics haven't changed. Germany is losing. The only question is timeline. The concrete fortifications of the West Wall outlasted the men who defended them. Bunkers still stand in German forests, tourist attractions and historical monuments. The soldiers who fought from those bunkers are mostly forgotten, remembered if at all as statistics in casualty reports. The Fallschirmjäger who held the West Wall in late 1944 achieved everything asked of them, delayed Allied advance, inflicted heavy casualties, maintained defensive coherence until ordered to withdraw. History barely notices because defensive success that precedes ultimate defeat gets classified as heroic failure rather than victory. The distinction matters to military historians analysing tactical performance. It meant nothing to soldiers fighting in November rain and December snow, watching comrades die in bunkers, defending ground they'd surrendered days later. The West Wall fighting demonstrated both the Fallschirmjägers' enduring tactical skill and their strategic irrelevance. They were still Germany's best infantry, trained, disciplined, effective. Being best couldn't change outcomes when strategy was bankrupt, resources exhausted, enemy superiority overwhelming. Mindel understood this, his troops understood it, they fought anyway because that's what professional soldiers do. The tragedy isn't that they lost, losing was inevitable. The tragedy is that so many died, delaying defeat that everyone knew was coming. The concrete survived, the men didn't. That's the West Wall's legacy. Bunkers and bodies, defensive success and strategic failure, elite troops ground down in battles that changed nothing except the casualty lists. December 16th, 1944. 5:30 in the morning. Von der Heide sits in darkness inside a Junkers 52 transport, listening to engines strain as the aircraft climbs to jump altitude. Behind him, 38 men from 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment prepare for Germany's first parachute operation in the West since 1941. The mission is insane: drop at night near Malmedy crossroads, seize and hold a position blocking American reinforcements to the Ardennes, enable 5th Panzer Army to reach the Meuse River. Von der Heide received orders 3 days ago, had 72 hours to assemble troops from across Germany, conduct mission brief, prepare for an operational type abandoned years earlier. The troops a mixture, a handful of Crete veterans like himself, some Tunisia and Sicily survivors, mostly recent recruits who've never jumped operationally. Aircraft are scraped together 112 transports, but pilots untrained in night navigation and formation flying. Weather is terrible: low clouds, poor visibility, high winds. Everything that made parachute operations high risk in 1941 has worsened. But Hitler personally approved this operation as part of the Ardennes offensive, so it proceeds despite obvious problems. Von der Heide checks his equipment, looks at his men's faces in dim red light. He sees fear, determination, resigned professionalism. They're jumping because ordered to, knowing chances of success are minimal. The green light flashes. Von der Heide throws himself into Belgian darkness, thinking, this is how it ends. Not in glory, but in futile repetition of mistakes we paid for in blood. The drop is catastrophic. Transport pilots, disoriented by clouds and ground fire, scatter the paratroopers across 25 kilometers of Belgian countryside. Von der Heide's 1,200-man battalion lands as isolated individuals and small groups, hopelessly dispersed. Some paratroopers land near Malmedy, as planned, approximately 150 men. Others land north near Eupen, south toward Monschau, west past the objective. 300 paratroopers are simply missing, never reach assembly points, presumably dead from landing injuries, captured by American patrols, or scattered so far they never find friendly forces. Von der Heide lands in a forest, spends 4 hours in darkness searching for his troops, finds 47 men by dawn. His radio operator landed elsewhere, no communications. His weapon containers landed elsewhere, limited ammunition. Supply drops scheduled for December 17th, never arrive, whether Allied interdiction or simple organizational failure. By December 18th, von der Heide has consolidated approximately 300 troops in rough defensive perimeter. They can't attack anything, they have no heavy weapons, American forces are everywhere, the mission sees crossroads, and hold is impossible. Von der Heide's force dissolves in forest, small groups trying to survive, hoping to reach German lines. Some succeed, most don't. Von der Heide himself, wounded and exhausted, surrenders December 23rd to American troops. Of 1,200 paratroopers who jumped, fewer than 300 returned to German lines. Germany's last Western airborne operation is complete, utter failure that justifies every lesson learned from Crete. While the parachute operation collapses, the main Ardennes offensive begins. 5th Fallschirmjäger Division, 11,000 troops under Colonel Heilmann, spearheads 6th Panzer Army advance through Losheim Gap. The division is Fallschirmjäger only in designation. Veterans from Normandy and West Wall fighting are dead or wounded, replaced by conscripts who completed abbreviated training. They attack American positions in pre-dawn darkness December 16th, achieve initial surprise, advance several kilometers. By mid-morning, American resistance stiffens. By afternoon, the advance stalls. 5th Fallschirmjäger Division lacks the offensive punch. Their designation suggests their defensive specialists forced into offensive role again, repeating Anzio's mistakes on Belgian terrain. American artillery, once organized, pounds German assembly areas. American reinforcements arrive faster than German planners expected. Fuel shortages limit German armor's advance. By December 20th, 5th Fallschirmjäger Division reaches furthest advance approximately 15 kilometers from start line, nowhere near objectives, having suffered 3,500 casualties. The division has accomplished nothing strategic, confirmed everything Anzio demonstrated. Fallschirmjäger excel defensively, fail offensively, should never be employed attacking prepared positions. December 20th through 26, Bastogne. 5th Fallschirmjäger Division, along with Panzer and Volksgrenadier units, surrounds American 101st Airborne Division, holding the town. Its market garden inverted Germans surrounding Allied paratroopers, attempting to reduce the pocket frustrated by determined resistance. But unlike Arnhem, Americans hold. They're resupplied by air, supported by eventual relief column, fighting from defensive positions in town that negate German numbers. 5th Fallschirmjäger troops, attacking Baston's perimeter, encounter American paratroopers fighting exactly as German paratroopers fought at Oosterbeek, desperately, professionally, refusing surrender. The irony is noted by some German veterans. One officer's diary entry: "We're fighting American airborne troops who resist like we resisted. They learned from us, now teach us lessons we'd rather not learn." Bastogne doesn't fall. American relief forces, led by Patton's Third Army, break the siege December 26th. 5th Fallschirmjäger Division, having failed to capture the town, withdraws with heavy casualties, 4,500 total, essentially 50% losses. The Ardennes offensive is over. Germany's last reserves are consumed. Strategic initiative is irretrievably lost. The parachute operation's failure exemplifies everything wrong with late-war German strategy. Hitler, obsessed with dramatic gestures and historical parallels, ordered parachute drop because it would be audacious, unexpected, potentially decisive. Nobody in operational command, not von der Heydt, not student, not staff officers, believed it could succeed. They voiced objections, were overruled, executed orders because military hierarchy demands obedience even when orders are suicidal. The result was predictable. Elite troops wasted on mission that achieved nothing, couldn't have achieved anything, existed only to satisfy Hitler's fantasy of reversing Germany's fortunes through bold action. Von der Heydt's 1,200 paratroopers, properly employed defending critical terrain, might have delayed Allied advance by weeks. Scattered across Belgian countryside on futile mission, they contributed nothing except casualty statistics. That misemployment using elite troops for missions that guarantee failure characterized German strategy through 1944 through 45. The Fallschirmjäger paid disproportionately because their reputation meant they received the impossible missions. The symbolic importance of conducting parachute operation exceeded any tactical rationale. Germany hadn't dropped paratroopers operationally since Crete. The Fallschirmjägers' identity as airborne force was pure fiction. They were ground infantry who'd abandoned parachute operations because operations proved unsustainable. Reviving parachute drops in December 1944 was Hitler's gesture toward lost glory, attempt to recapture 1940 successes through nostalgia and willpower. It failed because military operations succeed through logistics, planning, and realistic assessment of capabilities, not through symbolic gestures and wishful thinking. Von der Heydt understood this, tried to convey it through proper channels, was ignored. Post-war, he wrote extensively about the mission, describing it as criminal waste of trained soldiers for operation whose failure was guaranteed. That clarity came with hindsight. In December 1944, he had orders. He executed them professionally, knew they were doomed, did his duty anyway. Whether duty requires obeying suicidal orders is a philosophical question militaries hate examining. Von der Heydt examined it post-war, never reached satisfactory conclusion. He'd obeyed orders that killed his men for nothing. Was that professional responsibility or moral failure? Both? Neither. The ambiguity haunted him. January 1945, 5th and 6th Fallschirmjäger formations withdraw from the Ardennes with catastrophic losses. 5th Division 50% casualties, 11,000 deployed, 5,500 returning. 6th Regiment 75% casualties, 1,200 deployed, 300 returning. The units will be rebuilt again, receiving replacements to fill decimated ranks. But rebuilding is organizational fiction. The replacements aren't equivalent to casualties. Experienced NCOs and veteran soldiers died in Belgium. Replacements are teenage conscripts with weeks of training. The rebuilt units carry same designations, wear same insignia, lack same capabilities. It's institutional erosion disguised as reconstitution. By January 1945, Fallschirmjäger designation indicates almost nothing about unit quality. Some formations retain veteran cadres and fight effectively. Others are conscript divisions wearing elite uniforms. The variability makes Fallschirmjäger units unpredictable, some fiercely effective, others collapse at first pressure. Allied intelligence struggles assessing individual Fallschirmjäger divisions because capabilities vary so wildly. The reliable conclusion: even degraded Fallschirmjäger units fight harder than equivalent Wehrmacht formations. But harder doesn't mean effectively when degradation is severe. The Ardennes failure consumed Germany's last offensive capability. Mobile reserves, panzers, motorized infantry, artillery committed to the offensive were destroyed or so depleted they couldn't be reconstituted. From January 1945 onward, Germany fights purely defensively, no capability for strategic counterattack. The Fallschirmjäger, already functioning as defensive specialists, see their role codified, hold positions until overrun, delay enemy advance, die slowly while Allied armies close on Berlin. Its grim finality, acknowledgement that Germany will lose, fighting continues only to delay surrender's timing. Some soldiers embrace fatalism, we're dead anyway, might as well make enemies pay. Others seek survival, complete missions minimally, avoid unnecessary risks, surrender when reasonable. The latter approach becomes more common as war's end approaches. By March 1945, Fallschirmjäger units' fighting effectiveness correlates directly with veteran cadre percentage. Units with 10 to 20% veterans fight tenaciously. Units with under 5% veterans collapse quickly. The organizational designation means nothing. Human quality determines everything. The Ardennes consumed Germany's remaining high-quality soldiers, accelerating final collapse. Hitler's gamble, his attempt to recapture initiative through bold offensive, backfired, completely destroying reserves that might have prolonged defensive fighting, gaining nothing, hastening defeat. The Fallschirmjäger paid heavily for that miscalculation. They always paid heavily. That was their role. Elite troops sacrificed at moment of maximum futility, courage consumed by strategic incompetence. The historical memory of the Ardennes Battle of the Bulge to Americans focuses on American resistance at Bastogne, German offensive's initial success, ultimate Allied victory. German parachute operation barely registers in popular histories, dismissed as minor failed action in larger campaign. For the Fallschirmjäger, it represented final nail in their identity's coffin. They'd been airborne troops who didn't jump, maintaining fiction that parachute operations remained possible. December 1944 proved the fiction was unsustainable. Attempting parachute operation resulted in catastrophic failure that validated every objection to airborne warfare. After Ardennes, nobody pretended Fallschirmjäger would conduct airborne missions. They were infantry, elite by tradition only, fighting final losing battles until Germany collapsed. The transformation from revolutionary airborne force to ordinary ground troops was complete. What remained was dying. The Fallschirmjäger would do that professionally, expertly, pointlessly. Every battle from January through May 1945 demonstrated tactical competence and strategic irrelevance, courage and futility, professionalism serving doomed cause. The Ardennes was last gasp of offensive ambition, last pretense that Germany could reverse defeat. Its failure ended all pretense. What followed was collapse, slow or fast, depending on local conditions, but collapse, inevitable and total. The Fallschirmjäger would see it through to bitter end, because elite troops don't surrender easily, because reputation demands last stand resistance, because sometimes military organizations continue functioning even when everyone knows the cause is lost. That's the Ardennes legacy, final proof that being elite means nothing when strategy is bankrupt and war is lost. January 1945, Hürtgen Forest, German-Belgian border. An unnamed Fallschirmjäger soldier, his identity lost to history, his experience preserved only in a diary fragment, discovered decades later in a bunker writes by candlelight in a frozen dugout, "We are no longer the men who jumped at Crete. Most of those men are dead. We are no longer the men who held Casino. Most of those men are dead too. We are replacements wearing the uniforms of the dead, told we are elite because we wear the eagle and parachute insignia. But we have never jumped. Most of us have trained for only weeks. We hold these frozen woods because we are ordered to hold them, because retreat means execution, because somewhere behind us are families we might still protect. But we are not Fallschirmjäger anymore. We are just cold, hungry boys waiting to die." The diary ends there. The soldier who wrote it was found frozen in his position 3 days later by American troops. He was 17 years old. The 7th Fallschirmjäger Division rotated into the Hürtgen sector with 3,200 men in January 1945, less than a quarter of its authorized strength of 15,000. On paper, it was a division. In reality, it was barely a regiment. Of those 3,200, fewer than 300 were veterans with more than 6 months of service. The rest were conscripts, some drafted as recently as December, given 4 to 6 weeks of training before being sent to the front. They'd never attended parachute school. There was no time, no aircraft, no instructors available. They received Fallschirmjäger insignia because the designation still carried psychological weight, still suggested elite status that might frighten enemies and motivate the troops themselves, but the substance was gone. These were ordinary soldiers, inadequately trained, wearing the badges of an elite force that had ceased to exist. The forest itself was nightmare terrain, especially in winter. The Hurtgen covered approximately 50 square miles of dense woodland along the German-Belgian border, trees so thick that visibility rarely exceeded 50 meters. In January, snow lay 3 feet deep in clearings, less under the tree canopy but enough to make movement exhausting. The cold was brutal, temperatures dropping to -15 Celsius at night. Soldiers suffered frostbite even when not in combat, losing fingers and toes to the cold. Trenchfoot was epidemic. Men who stood in waterlogged foxholes for hours developed tissue damage that required amputation. The medical conditions alone would have devastated any unit. Combined with combat operations, they were catastrophic. February 2nd, 1945, American 78th Division attacks positions held by 7th Fallschirmjäger Division near Kestenich. The attack begins with artillery preparation, American guns firing for 40 minutes, shells bursting in the tree canopy, showering defenders with splinters and shrapnel. Tree burst artillery is particularly deadly in forests. The explosions occur at head height, shrapnel radiating downward into foxholes and trenches. German positions are pounded without the defenders being able to see where fire is coming from. Then American infantry advances through the trees, moving slowly, checking every position. They encounter resistance that varies wildly. One position is defended by 3 teenagers who surrender immediately. The next position fights fanatically, veterans who know they're doomed but refuse to quit. Within hours, American forces overrun the first line of German defenses. The 7th Fallschirmjäger Division positions collapse not through overwhelming assault but through simple inadequacy of the troops defending them. February 10th. Divisional headquarters receives 800 replacements, men pulled from Luftwaffe ground crew, former mechanics and radio operators, now designated as infantry. They arrive with 5 days of hasty infantry training, most having never thrown a live grenade or fired more than a magazine of ammunition. A veteran NCO, one of the few surviving Crete jumpers still serving with 7th Division, is tasked with integrating these men into his company. He looks at them boys, most of them, some visibly terrified, and understands this is suicide. They'll die within days, maybe hours. He conducts what training he can in the 24 hours before they move to forward positions. Basic stuff. How to dig a proper foxhole, how to keep weapons from freezing, where to aim when firing, when to shoot and when to hide. It's utterly inadequate, but it's all there's time for. By February 13th, 40% of these 800 men are casualties. By February 20th, fewer than 200 remain alive and unwounded. The psychological breakdown that occurred in 7th Fallschirmjäger Division during February exemplified what was happening across German forces in the West. Soldiers developed what period medical officers called combat exhaustion, but which modern understanding recognizes as acute stress reaction and PTSD. Symptoms included uncontrollable shaking, inability to follow orders, catatonic states, and, in extreme cases, self-inflicted wounds to escape combat. The 7th Division's medical officer reported treating over 300 psychiatric casualties in February alone, nearly 10% of the division's strength. This compared to historical rates of 1 to 2% in elite formations. The breakdown reflected both the intensity of combat and the inadequacy of the soldiers' training and preparation. Men who trained for 18 months and jumped at Crete could endure horrors that destroyed men who trained for 4 weeks and never left Germany before deployment. Desertion rates told the same story of organizational collapse. Fallschirmjäger formations historically maintained desertion rates under 1% monthly elite status, and unit cohesion kept soldiers fighting even in terrible conditions. By February 1945, 7th Fallschirmjäger Division reported desertion rate of 8.3%. Over 250 men disappeared from their units in a single month. Some were killed and their bodies never recovered, but interrogation of prisoners and examination of records suggested most simply walked away. They hid in the forest, surrendered to American patrols, or even attempted to reach Allied lines to give themselves up. The Wehrmacht's draconian punishment for desertion's summary execution couldn't suppress the phenomenon when soldiers calculated that desertion was safer than continued combat. This calculation itself represented ultimate institutional failure. When elite troops desert at rates approaching regular Wehrmacht units. The elite status is fiction. February 23rd. American forces launch major assault to clear remaining German positions in the Hurtgen. The 7th Fallschirmjäger Division, now reduced to fewer than 900 combat effectives, attempts defense that Doctrine would have required 3,000 troops to execute. The result is predetermined. American forces advance through the forest, methodically clearing German positions, taking prisoners by the dozen. Some Germans fight desperately, veteran NCOs and officers who understand this is the end, who fight because they've fought for years and don't know how to stop, but most surrender when given opportunity. They're cold, hungry, exhausted, and out of ammunition. The American soldiers who capture them are shocked by what they find: teenagers and men in their 40s, inadequately equipped, some without proper boots, many showing signs of frostbite and malnutrition. These are the elite Fallschirmjäger, the feared paratroopers, the Green Devils. They look like refugees. The veteran cadre watch the degradation with mixture of helplessness and despair. These men, the handful of Crete and casino survivors still alive, remembered when Fallschirmjäger meant something, when the designation indicated genuine capability earned through brutal selection and training. Now they commanded companies of conscripts who couldn't execute basic infantry tactics, who panicked under artillery fire, who surrendered at first opportunity. The veterans couldn't blame them. These boys had been thrown into combat with training that was criminally inadequate, equipment that was substandard, and leadership that ranged from incompetent to non-existent. The failure wasn't theirs, it was systemic, organizational, the inevitable result of Germany's manpower exhaustion and the Wehrmacht's refusal to acknowledge that elite forces require time and resources that no longer existed. March 5th, 1945. The 7th Fallschirmjäger Division is officially withdrawn from the Hurtgen Forest, with 900 effectives remaining from the original 3,200 deployed in January, 72% casualties in 5 weeks. The division will not be rebuilt. Instead, survivors will be scattered to other formations, their experience diluted, their identity as 7th Division erased. The divisional headquarters will continue to exist on paper, receiving replacements and maintaining organizational structure, but it will never again field an effective fighting force. This pattern, divisions destroyed, nominally rebuilt, destroyed again, characterized the final months of Fallschirmjäger history. The designations persisted long after the substance had been consumed. By March 1945, Fallschirmjäger had become title without meaning, tradition without capability, reputation divorced from reality. The Hurtgen fighting revealed the complete erosion of quality that defined late-war Fallschirmjäger formations. Compare the 7th Division in the Hurtgen to 1st Division at Casino just 10 months earlier. At Casino, experienced troops, adequate supplies, ideal defensive terrain, competent leadership result, 4 months of successful defense against overwhelming odds. In the Hurtgen, inexperienced conscripts, inadequate supplies, difficult terrain, degraded leadership result. 5 weeks of unsuccessful defense ending in collapse. The name was the same. The insignia was the same. Everything else had changed. The Fallschirmjäger designation, which had once indicated one of the Wehrmacht's most capable formations, now indicated nothing except organizational continuity that was itself fiction. Elite forces require quality soldiers, adequate training, competent leadership, and organizational support. By early 1945, Fallschirmjäger formations had none of these. They had only history, reputation, and the increasingly desperate orders of commanders who demanded miracles from troops incapable of delivering them. The Hurtgen represented nadir not just for 7th Fallschirmjäger Division, but for the entire Fallschirmjäger force structure. Other divisions, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, all experienced similar degradation, though perhaps not as extreme. The veteran cadre that had sustained these formations through 1943 and 1944 was gone, killed in Normandy, the Ardennes, Sicily, Italy. Replacements came from increasingly inadequate sources, men too young, too old, too poorly trained. Equipment quality declined as German industry collapsed under Allied bombing, supply systems failed as transportation infrastructure was destroyed, command quality deteriorated as experienced officers died and were replaced by men promoted beyond their capabilities. The institutional knowledge that made elite units elite, the accumulated wisdom about tactics, training, and operations was being lost faster than it could be transmitted to new soldiers. By March 1945, the Fallschirmjäger existed in name only. The substance was gone. March 2nd, 1945, General Major Heinz Vierbig, commanding 2nd Fallschirmjäger Division, stands on the west bank of the Rhine, near Wesel, watching American artillery pound his positions from across the river. The division deployed here with 5,000 men, a third of authorized strength, but still a coherent fighting force. Vierbig's orders are explicit. Defend the Rhine crossings to the last man, prevent American forces from establishing bridgeheads, hold until relieved or destroyed. He knows relief won't come. The question is how long his division can hold and at what cost. Behind him, German engineers prepare demolition charges on the Wesel Bridge. If American forces break through, the bridge must be destroyed. But destroying it means abandoning German troops still on the West Bank. Vierbig is being asked to sacrifice his division to buy time for what the war is lost. Everyone knows it. But orders are orders. The division will fight. The strategic situation along the Rhine in early March 1945 was hopeless for Germany from any objective assessment. American, British, and French forces held the entire West Bank from Netherlands to Switzerland. German forces defending the Rhine were shadows of their former strength divisions at regiment size, regiments at battalion size, battalions at company size. 6 Fallschirmjäger divisions were designated as defending the Rhine sector, 1st, 2nd, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. Combined, these 6 divisions fielded perhaps 35,000 troops less than 3 divisions at full strength. They faced over 1 million Allied troops preparing to cross the Rhine and invade Germany proper. The mathematics were impossible, but Hitler's orders permitted no withdrawal, no surrender, no acknowledgement that defence was futile. The Fallschirmjäger would defend until destroyed. March 7th, 1945. Remagen. The moment that shattered German Rhine defence occurred not through overwhelming assault but through luck and failure. American 9th Armoured Division advance units reached the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, expecting to find it destroyed, as all other Rhine bridges had been. Instead, they found it intact. German engineers had attempted demolition, but the charges failed to completely destroy the structure. American troops charged across under fire, securing a bridgehead on the east bank. Within 24 hours, 4 American divisions were crossing at Remagen. The nearest Fallschirmjäger unit, elements of 6th Regiment, was 15 kilometers away too far to counterattack effectively. By the time German forces could organize response, the bridgehead was too strong to reduce. The Remagen bridgehead should have been eliminated immediately if German military capability had matched German military doctrine. Standard doctrine called for immediate counterattack against any penetration, concentration of all available reserves, maximum effort to destroy enemy forces before they could consolidate. But doctrine assumed reserves existed, assumed mobile forces could be concentrated, assumed logistics could support sustained operations. None of these assumptions held in March 1945. German reserves were scratch formations assembled from training units and rear echelon troops. Mobility was limited by fuel shortages, tanks and trucks sat immobile for lack of gasoline. Logistics couldn't support sustained operations because Allied air attacks had destroyed the transportation system. The Fallschirmjäger units that tried to counterattack the Remagen bridgehead moved on foot, attacked without adequate artillery support, and were repulsed by American forces with overwhelming firepower advantage. March 8 through 10, German High Command assembles what it characterizes as maximum effort to eliminate the Remagen bridgehead. The effort includes elements from 5 divisions, including 2nd Fallschirmjäger Division pulled from Wesel defences. Approximately 8,000 German troops attack the bridgehead, which by March 9th contains over 20,000 American troops with substantial artillery and armour support. The German attacks are brave and futile. Fallschirmjäger infantry advances across open ground into American machine gun fire. German tanks, few in number and critically short of fuel, are knocked out by American tank destroyers. Artillery support is minimal. German guns fire perhaps 10 shells each before ammunition is exhausted. The attacks collapse within hours, German forces withdrawing with casualties approaching 40%. The Remagen bridgehead remains intact, expanding daily, becoming the launching point for American drive into central Germany. March 22nd through 23rd. Operation Plunder. The main Allied Rhine crossing British and Canadian forces attack across the Rhine at Wesel under cover of the largest artillery barrage of the Western Front, over 3,000 guns firing for hours. 2nd Fallschirmjäger Division, defending Wesel, endures bombardment that obliterates forward positions. Bunkers collapse, trenches cave in, communication lines are cut. When British infantry advances in assault boats, they encounter resistance that varies from fierce to non-existent. Some Fallschirmjäger positions fight desperately, German crews manning machine guns until killed. Other positions surrender immediately, soldiers emerging with hands raised, grateful the war is over for them. By evening March 22nd, British forces have secured substantial bridgehead. By March 23rd, the bridgehead is expanding, British armour pouring across pontoon bridges erected by engineers. March 24, Operation Varsity, the airborne component of the Rhine crossing. Over 16,000 British and American paratroopers drop east of the Rhine, the largest single-day airborne operation in history. The drop zones are defended by scattered German forces, including elements of 8th Fallschirmjäger Division. This is war's supreme irony made manifest. German paratroopers, the inventors of airborne warfare, defending against Allied airborne assault. The German defence is minimal. 8th Division has perhaps 800 troops in the drop zone area, most of them recent conscripts with no combat experience. Allied paratroopers land, consolidate rapidly, and overwhelm German positions within hours. Some German troops never even engage. They watch the massive aerial armada, understand resistance is futile, and surrender at first opportunity. The veterans among them remember Crete, remember when German paratroopers were the ones dropping from the sky. Now they're on the ground, watching enemies execute operations. Germany pioneered. The historical circle is complete. By April 1st, all German forces west of the Rhine have been killed, captured, or driven across the river. The 6 Fallschirmjäger divisions that defended the Rhine sector have ceased to exist as coherent formations. Combined casualties exceed 25,000, nearly 75% of the forces committed. The survivors, scattered and disorganized, retreat into Germany proper with no realistic hope of reconstituting their units. Some will fight on in the Ruhr pocket, some will retreat toward Berlin, some will simply dissolve, soldiers walking away from units that no longer functionally exist. The Rhine defense, which Hitler had declared would be Germany's final stand, lasted less than a month against determined Allied assault. Vierbig surrenders 2nd Fallschirmjäger Division's remnants, approximately 800 men from the 5,000 who began the defense, to British forces on March 25th. The surrender ceremony is brief and unemotional. British officers are courteous but firm. German officers are exhausted and defeated. Vierbig formally surrenders his command, hands over his sidearm, and is escorted to a prisoner collection point. He will spend 2 years in British captivity before repatriation to Germany in 1947. Post-war, he will write that the Rhine defence was military absurdity. Soldiers sacrificed to delay inevitable defeat by days or weeks. We fought well, it changed nothing. That is the tragedy. We were competent enough to inflict casualties and delay the enemy, but not powerful enough to alter outcomes. Courage and skill are not enough when strategy is bankrupt. The final statistics of the Rhine crossings tell story of overwhelming Allied material superiority that no amount of German tactical skill could overcome. Allied forces committed over 1 million troops, 15,000 artillery pieces, and 4,000 tanks to the Rhine crossings. German forces defending numbered perhaps 200,000 troops with fewer than 500 operational tanks and 1,000 artillery pieces. Allied air forces flew over 10,000 sorties in support of crossing operations. German Air Force flew fewer than 300. The disparity in every measurable category was so extreme that tactical considerations became almost irrelevant. This was industrial warfare at its apex. The side with more men, more guns, more planes, more supplies won because the quantitative advantage was insurmountable. The Fallschirmjäger defending the Rhine demonstrated that courage, training, and determination couldn't bridge the resource gap. Elite status meant they fought better than ordinary Wehrmacht units, held positions longer, inflicted higher casualties before being overrun. But better and longer were relative terms. They still lost. They always were going to lose. The only question was how many would die before the inevitable. The Rhine crossings represented final proof that Fallschirmjäger designation by April 1945 indicated nothing about actual capability. The divisions defending the Rhine bore famous numbers, 1st, 2nd, 6th, that had once signified elite formations, but the units were hollow shells, their veterans dead, their replacements inadequate, their equipment worn out, their supply lines broken. They were Fallschirmjäger only in name, ordinary troops wearing elite insignia, expected to perform miracles they couldn't deliver. Some performed well despite everything, veteran NCOs, leading conscript platoons with tactical skill that delayed Allied advance. But individual excellence couldn't compensate for systemic collapse. The Fallschirmjäger force structure, like the Wehrmacht itself, was destroyed not through any single failure, but through cumulative attrition that consumed strength faster than it could be regenerated. By April 1st, 1945, the Fallschirmjäger, as military force, had ceased to exist. What remained were scattered survivors, organizational designations, and memories of when the Green Devils had been Germany's elite. The Rhine crossings didn't destroy the Fallschirmjäger, they merely made obvious what had been true for months. The destruction was already complete. April 15, 1945, Northern Germany. General Kurt Student surrenders 2nd Fallschirmjäger Corps remnants to British forces, approximately 3,000 troops, representing the scattered survivors of multiple divisions. Student insists on formal surrender ceremony, arguing that his troops deserve honours due to elite formations despite their defeat. British officers, recognising Student's historical significance as father of German Airborne forces, agree to formal ceremony. Student and his remaining officers surrender their sidearms. Fallschirmjäger troops march into captivity in formation, maintaining military bearing despite exhaustion and defeat. Its symbolic gesture, attempting to preserve dignity and humiliation, maintaining the fiction that these are still the elite warriors who jumped at Crete. Everyone present understands the reality. These are defeated soldiers whose war is over, their elite status reduced to historical memory, their combat capability exhausted. The ceremony concludes. The Fallschirmjäger march into prison camps. Their war, which began in 1940 with revolution in military doctrine, ends in 1945 with surrender in the ruins of the Reich they fought to defend. May 8, 1945, VE Day. Germany surrenders unconditionally. Across Europe, scattered Fallschirmjäger units lay down arms. Some surrender to Western allies, preferring American or British captivity to Soviet. Others surrender to Soviet forces, facing years in gulags. Some simply dissolve, soldiers discarding uniforms and attempting to blend into civilian populations. Allied intelligence estimates that 8 Fallschirmjäger divisions existed on paper in the war's final weeks, with aggregate combat strength of approximately 15,000 men, 10% of authorized strength. The divisions are organizational fictions, designations without corresponding reality. Of the approximately 150,000 men who served in Fallschirmjäger units between 1943 and 1945, roughly 80,000 are dead or missing, 60,000 wounded, and 10,000 returned to Germany intact. The casualty rate, 53% killed or missing, exceeds Wehrmacht average of 30% and approaches Waffen-SS levels. Elite status had concrete costs, measured in bodies and shattered lives. 1946. Nuremberg trials. Student testifies about Fallschirmjäger operations, defending military professionalism of airborne forces while acknowledging regime's criminality. The prosecution asks about Crete, about reprisal executions of Cretan civilians, about war crimes committed by Fallschirmjäger units. Student argues that combat operations were conducted professionally, that any crimes were aberrations, that Fallschirmjäger should be distinguished from SS formations. The judges note testimony but find the distinctions less clear than student suggests. Evidence exists of Fallschirmjäger participation in reprisals, in execution of prisoners, in atrocities that contradicted supposed elite professionalism. The verdict. Student is sentenced to 5 years imprisonment for war crimes at Crete. He serves the sentence, is released in 1948, lives until 1978. His legacy remains contested, brilliant innovator or war criminal, professional soldier or Nazi enabler. The ambiguity is never resolved. 1956. West Germany creates Bundeswehr, new military force for the Federal Republic. Among the new units, Fallschirmjäger elite airborne forces explicitly modelled on World War II paratrooper traditions. The Bundeswehr Fallschirmjäger adopt the maroon beret and distinctive insignia, emphasising continuity with Wehrmacht airborne forces while distancing from Nazi ideology. Many World War II Fallschirmjäger veterans serve as instructors and advisors, transmitting tactical knowledge while carefully navigating the political complexity of Wehrmacht legacy. The new Fallschirmjäger emphasized professional military values, courage, unit cohesion, technical excellence, while explicitly rejecting National Socialism. Its attempted rehabilitation of institutional identity, preserving what can be salvaged from historical association that remains problematic. The experiment succeeds partially. Bundeswehr Fallschirmjäger become respected NATO force. But the connection to World War II predecessors remains uncomfortable topic, history that can't be fully embraced or completely rejected. The post-war fates of notable Fallschirmjäger leaders illustrate the moral complexity of military service in criminal regime. Von der Heide becomes reserve officer, an academic, writes extensively about airborne operations, consults for NATO on paratrooper doctrine. He emphasizes tactical professionalism, largely avoids discussion of political context, positions himself as soldier following orders. Ranke is sentenced to war crimes for reprisal executions, serves 5 years, released 1951. He becomes controversial figure in veteran community. Some praise his military leadership, others condemn his war crimes. Heydrich dies in Soviet captivity in 1947. Circumstances unclear, possibly executed or killed by camp conditions. The variety of fates, academic success, war crimes, conviction, death in captivity, reflects different paths through morally compromised history. The Cold War provides context for re-evaluating Fallschirmjäger legacy. NATO, facing Soviet military threat, studies Wehrmacht tactics including Fallschirmjäger defensive operations. The battles of Cassino, Sicily, and the West Wall become case studies in how numerically inferior forces can delay superior enemies through tactical skill and determination. Military analysts separate tactical lessons from political context, arguing that studying effective military operations doesn't constitute endorsement of the regime those operations served. This pragmatic approach allows incorporation of German tactical doctrine into NATO training while officially condemning Nazi ideology. The Fallschirmjäger, having fought primarily against Western allies rather than being directly implicated in Holocaust operations, become more acceptable subjects of military study than SS formations. The distinction allows limited rehabilitation of Fallschirmjäger reputation as professional soldiers, distinct from Nazi true believers. Modern historical assessment recognizes complexity that immediate post-war narratives simplified. The Fallschirmjäger were neither simple heroes nor simple villains. They were highly skilled soldiers, serving criminal regime, capable of both professional military excellence and participation in war crimes. Their tactical achievements at Cassino and Crete were genuine, demonstrating innovative doctrine and individual courage. Their involvement in reprisal executions and atrocities in Crete, Russia, and elsewhere was equally genuine, demonstrating complicity in regime's brutality. The historical challenge is acknowledging both aspects simultaneously, recognizing tactical proficiency without excusing moral failures, condemning crimes without denying military capability. This balanced assessment remains difficult. Popular culture prefers simpler narratives, but serious military history requires grappling with uncomfortable reality that effective soldiers can serve evil causes, that tactical brilliance doesn't constitute moral justification. The strategic assessment of Fallschirmjäger contribution to German war effort yields mixed conclusions. At tactical level, Fallschirmjäger units consistently outperformed equivalent Wehrmacht formations, inflicting disproportionate casualties and holding positions that ordinary troops couldn't defend. At operational level, their impact was limited by misemployment used as ground infantry rather than airborne shock troops, dispersed rather than concentrated, assigned defensive missions when trained for offensive operations. At strategic level, their contribution was negligible. They delayed Allied advances by weeks but couldn't alter fundamental strategic realities. Germany's defeat was determined by industrial capacity, resource availability, and strategic overreach. Elite infantry, however skilled, couldn't overcome those fundamental disadvantages. The Fallschirmjäger fought magnificently and lost cause. Their sacrifice achieved nothing except higher casualty lists. The tragedy of the Fallschirmjäger lies in this gap between individual sacrifice and strategic futility. Thousands of young men volunteered for elite service, endured brutal training, demonstrated courage under fire, fought skillfully against overwhelming odds, all in service of a regime that didn't deserve their loyalty and strategy that couldn't succeed. Their courage was real, their suffering was real, the friends they lost were real. but it meant nothing strategically. They delayed inevitable defeat, inflicted casualties on enemies who could absorb losses, died for objectives that were abandoned within days or weeks. Post-war survivors struggled with this recognition that their service, while demanding everything they had, accomplished nothing that mattered. Some found meaning through camaraderie, through bonds forged in combat that transcended political context. Others never reconciled the contradiction between what they'd sacrificed and what it achieved. The final reflection on Fallschirmjäger legacy must acknowledge that military excellence exists independent of moral context, but cannot be evaluated independent of it. The Fallschirmjäger demonstrated that highly trained, well-led troops can achieve remarkable results even in disadvantageous circumstances. They proved that defensive warfare, properly executed, can extract severe costs from stronger opponents. They validated Airborne doctrine that influenced military development worldwide, but they did so serving regime responsible for Holocaust, wars of aggression, and atrocities across Europe. Their tactical achievements can be studied and appreciated. Their strategic employment can be analysed for lessons. But the full story requires acknowledging that capability and morality are separate dimensions, that one can be impressed by tactical proficiency while condemning the cause it served. The Fallschirmjäger were extraordinary soldiers in evil service. Both parts of that assessment are true, neither cancels the other. That's the complicated legacy they left, one that resists simple judgment and demands engagement with uncomfortable historical truths. The Green Devils flew high in 1940, pioneering airborne warfare that changed military doctrine. They fought desperately from 1941 through 1945, demonstrating tactical skill that remains studied today. They fell completely by war's end, their formations destroyed, their reputation compromised, their sacrifice rendered meaningless by strategic bankruptcy of regime they served. The Eagles, grounded forever, left legacy that remains contested 80 years later. They were elite, they were complicit, they were courageous, they were defeated. They were all these things simultaneously. History's judgment remains divided, as perhaps it should be. Some stories don't resolve into neat conclusions. The Fallschirmjäger story is one of them. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.